Today we've got an actualize.org video we'll be watching. What does awakening feel like is what we'll be discovering and learning together. Trying to learn what the words Leo uses and what they refer to. And maybe do a little bit of work to see if it fits into some other concepts that we may have and other understandings that we may have developed over the years. And also seeing if it fits into our own experiences. I think we'll have a lot to learn. It should be pretty fun. And then after that, we've got a bit of a response from Frank Yang on Instagram for this post. So comparing multiple people and their different experiences and how they use the language, we've got a lot to explore.
You are God.
Oh, thanks for following. Okay, let's get right into it. Deprived life. What's up, man?
On this channel, we spent a lot of time talking about awakening, using the word awakening.
Awakening.
And in fact, in pop culture, the word woke now is becoming trendy. Of course, it doesn't mean what I mean when I say awakening. Mm-hmm. But what do I mean when I say awakening?
Okay, let's learn.
So I thought I would do an episode just exclusively, purely describing the subjective phenomenology of awakening. What does it feel like to awaken? Mm-hmm. Never mind what it means metaphysically, what it means for your life, what the consequences are. Forget all that. Just what does it actually feel like?
Okay, perfect. I like this. So we're getting very, very narrow. We're not learning about any implications. We're not learning about any of ontology, metaphysics, blah, blah, blah. Drop all that. Exactly what it feels like. Phenomenology. That's all we want. Very, very specific, very narrow. We're getting into it.
And I remember when I first started learning about enlightenment and awakening, I was also very curious about this, and I didn't get very good descriptions that I found satisfying from other teachers and gurus. A lot of them are kind of quiet about it, or they tell their personal story of awakening, but it doesn't really do a good job of describing it phenomenologically. Uh-huh. So I'm going to attempt that here today. Now, this is tricky to do by its very nature because it's an ineffable experience, and really it goes beyond even the notion of an experience at all.
Okay. I like it because, of course, it's ineffable. If you think of any intuitive way of interacting in the world, any of the ways that we can do things, most of them are ineffable, right? You can vaguely try to describe it and hope that the person who's listening has had a similar enough experience to just accept it. But it's ultimately ineffable. And that's all your experience is. Presumably, this is even beyond experience. So it's going to be very difficult unless other people have experienced this sort of non-experience or whatever. And you have to develop a new, unique, theoretical type of language to describe this thing. And hopefully all the people who you're communicating with all understand this new theoretical language to describe this thing so that you can actually have some sort of development in the precision of speaking about this awakening. Hopefully. But if you can't do that, if you don't have that, well, it's going to be completely ineffable. There's no consensus way to describe it. And even the theoretical description obviously isn't going to be touching the actual experience. So glad we're putting that up front.
And also because there are many different types and depths of awakening. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things you will realize if you do a lot of this work, is that there's so much depth and also different types and facets to awakening. In fact, I released an episode in the past called The Many Facets of Awakening, which talk about the dozens of different facets that exist to awakening. I've had hundreds of awakenings, and many of them, oddly enough, have had different flavors and hit upon different facets. Now, that doesn't mean that these awakenings all contradict each other. Actually, the opposite is the case. they beautifully synergize together, shedding light on more and more of absolute truth, but from different angles.
Okay.
Sometimes you get a glimpse of one facet, then another facet, then 2 or 3 facets together, and then your mind is stitching these facets together. And then in the future, as you have your awakenings, more of the facets get illuminated simultaneously for your pleasure.
Nice. So I'm sure we're going to get into how there's a lot of things are stripped away in so-called awakening. I think this is what we're going to be getting at here. There's going to be a lot of things that are not necessary for awakening, meaning that they can come or they can go. So you're going to have many awakenings which have aspects which are just kind of unnecessary. So they may be there, they may not be there. And if you're describing it and you're including all those things that may or may not be there, it's going to seem like a different thing. It's going to be a different flavor. It's going to be a different facet. But those are just additives, accoutrement, or ornamentations, whatever. It's just extra on top.
Or horror, depending on how you look at it.
For your pleasure or your
Some
horror.
of these facets can be quite challenging to integrate, but once you do integrate them, then that opens up the possibility of stitching them and connecting them with other facets that you've yet to discover. And then eventually you can see the entire thing with all of its facets.
Wow.
And that's when it gets really profound.
Wow.
And there's different degrees of depth to each facet and so forth. But anyways, it gets complicated.
Okay.
So what I'll be describing here is how I personally experience awakenings.
Okay.
There's a lot of variability amongst how people experience awakening and have various kinds of mystical spiritual experiences. There's an enormous amount of variability.
So this is how he experiences awakening. What awakening feels like to Leo personally. Good. Okay. He said earlier that was some teachers usually talk about their own personal experience and they don't really give a broad overview. But presumably his personal experience is broad enough to be broad for us. I'm not entirely sure. There seemed to be a little bit of a contradiction in the way that he's presenting this. However, we can keep this in mind. This is his own personal experience and how he experiences awakening.
And people use words like awakening and enlightenment and mysticism in different ways.
Yeah, that's
for
something
different
very
states
important.
of consciousness.
Very important to keep in
So
mind.
be careful about that too. Sometimes when people are talking about a spiritual experience or state and they use the same word, they may not be talking about the same thing. So keep that in mind too.
Okay.
So just because what I'll be describing here is how it feels for me doesn't mean that it will necessarily feel that way for you. So be careful with letting this sort of shape and color your own experience of awakening. You might have an awakening that's different from mine, then you might wonder like, well, but this doesn't match up with what Leo said. And that just might be because you're different. You have a different neurology, different genetics, different way of interpreting the world and so forth. Or maybe what you had was not really a proper awakening.
How do you untangle that? Is it a different facet of awakening? Is it a different perspective from awakening? Or is it just not awakening? Right? What is the essential part? I'm sure we're going to try our best to strip down to get to the essential thing that's going to be shared between all awakenings. But that's going to be very difficult to do in a very short video. So maybe it's just a broad thing that applies to most awakenings. And this is definitely how it applies to most of Leo's. But may not describe yours in particular. Maybe not. That might be a little tough to unparse or parse out if you're new.
And it can be tricky to distinguish between those things. Also, you have to be careful to distinguish between the awakening itself versus the ego's reactions to it. And a lot of times these can get conflated. So the awakening will happen, that's one thing, and then your ego mind can still be intact, and it can still be struggling, thinking, fantasizing, projecting, reacting. It can be in shock. It can be happy. It can be crying. It can be dramatic. It can be psychotic. Whatever is going on.
There's going to be a lot added on
And
there, and this is
those reactions are not the same thing as the awakening itself.
right, because this is where it's going to be there's going to be lots of added complexity with the reactions and the interpretations after the fact. Right? There's going to be something here that's going to be very stripped down and, basic and bare, and then the reaction to it adds a lot. Just a different perspective, adding a lot to it, and then you're going to try to translate that addition back into some sort of intellectual understanding, and that's going to add even more noise to it, and it's just going to get very, very complicated, or at least it's going to seem very complicated. And from a certain perspective, all these things are going to be extremely complicated, but that's because we're adding so much. That's because of the extra reaction that is going on from our thoughts after the experience has already passed. Non-experience experience has already passed.
You see?
I see.
So it gets a little tricky there too. How do you distinguish those two things? And then also you have to distinguish between awakenings and other mystical phenomena that can occur. You can have mystical visions. You might see ghosts and aliens and DMT entities and angels and Jesus and Buddha. And that might be all well and good, but is that really awakening? Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't.
Maybe.
It's a little tricky.
I like it. I like how very specific we're getting here, because he said all the other things about, your emotions being incidental and not really mattering. You may feel terrified, you may feel pleasure, maybe good, maybe bad, whatever. But then even here, it may be some sort of mystical experience. It may be some sort of exotic experience. You may see Jesus, you may see Buddha, and that could be a part of your that could be a part of your awakening experience. But also, it could just not be. You could just as easily feel pleasant and see Jesus without awakening. Because it's all incidental, remember? It's all incidental. None of that stuff matters. None of that stuff is the essence of your awakening. Maybe different facets of it, and those facets can appear without an awakening. So, tricky. Remember that.
So what I'm going to try to explain here is what I would call sort of a pure, and I use that word sort of loosely,
Pure.
A pure awakening.
Loosely. Pure
without
awakening.
a bunch of mystical visionary stuff, which could or could not accompany an awakening.
Incidental.
So just because there's mystical visionary stuff doesn't mean that it's automatically not an awakening. But also just because that's there, Jesus shows up to you or something, or you see an angel, that also doesn't mean it is an awakening. So what exactly is an awakening? Well, let's clear this up. I actually sort of kind of want to guide you through it a little bit from like a first-person experience so you can sort of imagine it for yourself, but also with the warning that anything you imagine awakening is, it's not. So everything that I share with you here, it's all just going to be stories and fantasies. It's not going to actually be awakening. The real awakening, if you ever experience it, will be something radically beyond whatever you imagine it to be. But anyways, let's give it a shot. So also, the reason that I wanted to shoot this episode is because maybe this will clear up some misconceptions. Because a lot of times when spiritual teachers don't fill in the blanks and they kind of just leave things vague and ambiguous, that sort of Zen approach, that very tacit Zen style of spiritual teaching, the problem with that is that the active mind fills in the gaps with a bunch of fantasies and bullshit.
Yeah, so we definitely have to remember that you can add a bunch of stuff. And for some people, the sort of Zen approach where you don't say anything is the most helpful, right? It's the most obvious. It is in harmony with the way that they interact in the world and how they're practicing at the moment. So they can get to this awakening without adding anything and they have no external additions. But from other people, when they don't have anything added, they just make up stuff in their own mind, and it makes it difficult for them. It makes it more hard for them because they're blocked by their own ideas. And what you need to do is give them better ideas. Give them better conceptions that they can more easily drop off so that they can actually get towards these experiences or non-experiences or awakenings that we want them to get towards, apparently. The mind will interpret the awakening and use symbolism to conceptualize and understand it. Exactly. And that's where it gets complicated. When you want to understand it, that's where it gets complicated, which is not a problem. Complexity is very cool. And if you could do that systematically and get to some really cool symbolizing and, flesh out a full worldview with that, that's very nice. But it's not necessary. What's up?
So personally, I think that it's very dangerous to give spiritual students ambiguous, vague notions of what awakening is, because their mind is not just going to sit around idly and accept this emptiness that the teacher has left in the student's mind. The mind is going to fill it in with all sorts of projections, assumptions, fantasies, and expectations, which are probably going to be very deeply wrong. More wrong than if the teacher actually colored in some of the details. So here's me coloring in some of the details.
Okay.
All right, so imagine this. You're just sitting there, like you are right now. You're just sitting there. You're looking around the room. It's an ordinary room. Colors, sounds, feelings in your body.
Will do, Kurt. I'll let you know if I have any questions for Leo. Definitely. Yeah, I'm very excited for that talk. That's going to be extremely interesting. Hopefully you've been watching some of his videos and catching up with his worldview. Definitely, I'll let you know.
Nothing changes in your visual field. Colors and objects remain the same as they always were. So one of the misconceptions that people have about awakening is that they ask sort of like, well, what is the visual content? Because we're very visual creatures. Mm-hmm. What is the visual content of an awakening? Like, what do you see? Or what do you not see, in the sense that, like, do I stop seeing altogether? Does my vision disappear? Do objects disappear? Is there just literally an empty void of nothing? And what I'm telling you is no. Nothing visually changes.
Nothing changes. Nothing necessarily changes. Again, this is all incidental. So everything can just stay the same. You don't need additives. You don't need to have some sort of trippy experience for your awakening. You can just be in your natural state. You can just see the world as the world already is. That's all you need for awakening. You just become more. I'm sure he'll get into some other aspects of it. I don't want to overspeak. But I'm thinking we might get to more clarity, more, maybe more vivid, maybe just more conscious or more aware. The language gets a little bit more fuzzy here. But that's all. It's not like anything changes. It's just more clear. We'll let Leo speak for it.
Strictly speaking, in a pure awakening, the only thing that changes, imagine like this. Imagine there's a dial, like a master volume knob on a sound controller. This is the consciousness dial. This dial regulates how conscious you are.
Okay.
Right now, for you, for an ordinary person, that dial is set to like a 3, let's say. If you're sleepy, that dial is like at a 1.
Okay.
If you're dreaming in deep sleep, that dial is maybe at a 0.2.
Dreaming. I wonder why he would consider dreaming to be less aware. Okay. Maybe there seems to be an assumption here. Well, okay, interesting. He's not giving very much. I'm pausing a lot before he's speaking here. But if we're assuming that dreaming makes you less aware, that seems to have the assumption that the external world is what you want to be aware of, which I don't think he would want to I don't think he would want that to be a part of his worldview. I don't think that he wants that assumption to be in there, but he seems to be having that assumption by stating that the dreaming state is less aware than your waking state, which is fascinating. I think that may have just been accidental, but we'll hear a little bit more.
And if you're totally unconscious, that dial, let's say, is 0.
Okay.
So the difficulty of explaining this to an ordinary person who's never experienced it is that for most people, their experience of what this dial can do only ranges from 0 to 3. It's never gone any higher than 3. Maybe it's gone to a 4. Like, if you've meditated for a bit, you can sit there, you can kind of focus, and you can become a little more conscious, and maybe it cranks from a 3 to a 4. If you're very, very clear-minded and sober. So really, in a sense, this dial controls your sobriety. Ordinarily, we think that like this normal state that we're in, this is sobriety, right? Well, that's a sobriety level 3.
Mm-hmm.
But you can crank this master knob of consciousness, and it starts to increase your sobriety. To a 4, to a 5, to a 6. It goes up to 11.
Okay. What's the scale? Out of 10 to 11? Interesting. Human-centric understanding of consciousness is a limited one. Yeah, I think so. I think that would be accurate. Now, I'm not sure if... I mean, this could just be a big video meant for very, very early entry level folks. So he's allowing for a little bit of looseness and understanding here. But it does seem a bit strange to say that to be sleepy is the same as being less conscious. So you can be very conscious while you're sleepy. You can be very conscious while you're dreaming. And you can also be very conscious of nothing, which would seem to be unconscious. It might appear as unconsciousness. And you can be awake and very much not conscious. You can be sober and not conscious. So there's, for me, that's a little bit of a kink in the understanding from what I have and what he's describing. My understanding and what he's describing here. So just a big question mark for me in terms of what he's describing at the moment. But interesting no less. And it makes a bit of sense. We can think of it in his way. If you're unconscious, you're not conscious. If you're dreaming, you're not aware of the outside world. If you're sleepy, you're having trouble processing the outside world. When you're awake, you have a basic function. You can see things. You can be aware of things. And presumably you become more and more aware of the external world and all of your feelings and all of your perceptions and so on. And you're more conscious up to 11. And I don't know what the dial is set to. I don't know what the limits of the dial are. So he may start jumping up to higher numbers, or he may just say infinity or something. Let's hear it.
And then it goes up to 100.
Uh-huh.
And then it keeps spinning to 1,000. And then it keeps spinning to 100,000. And you realize that this knob spins forever.
Infinite consciousness, huh?
There's no limit to how sober and conscious you can become. It just so happens you live most of your life at a 3.
So I like when I hear things about infinity and this sort of extreme language. It would be nicer though if we had a bit of a better map for the not infinite, like if he's saying that our normal waking state is at 3, so most people are at 3. I think he said the range from 3 to 4, or from 0 to 4, let's say, for most people for their entire lives. They go to sleep, and sometimes they're awake and aware, and sometimes they're hyper-focused. Then this is from a 0 to a 4. That's a very small range. And then he's saying that you can get to level 10, and then you can get to level 100, and then you can get to 1,000, and then you can get to infinity. It'd be very interesting to have a little bit more clarity in what it means for somebody to be at a level 5, or for somebody to be at a level 10. And then what is this range from 10 to 50? What is that like? And what is the range from 100 to 1,000 like? What is this range? To be a little bit more clear, Because for me, I don't like the lack of precision when we have like this very narrow range for our normal waking state, and then he just says, well, to be awakened is like infinite. You just throw out everything, and it's like infinity. You're just all the way to the max, to the max, to the max, without explaining anything in the middle. There seems to be a lot of imprecision there, and a lot of, it gives space for a lot of confusion because we're trying to clarify the matter. So I'd like to have a little bit more precision in that. However, we're giving a broad stroke right now. It's a long video, so he may fill it in for us.
And so have all your friends and all the people you know. And so there's a point at which the knob gets cranked, let's say to 1,000 or beyond. There's almost a very distinct threshold that is crossed where you look at the room. Nothing has changed. The colors are all the same. The objects are all the same. You look at your hands, your body. You look around the room and you realize, oh my God, I'm awake. This is what it means to be awake.
This is it. We did it.
It's just that knob has gotten cranked up so much. You become so awake. You become so woke that it's terrifying.
Is it terrifying? Is it necessarily terrifying? Are we adding some things? Are we staying with the pure awakening, or are we getting into personal experience with his interpretation of what it is? Is it necessarily terrifying or not? I'd wager to say it's not necessarily terrifying. It could be nice, it could be not nice, it doesn't really matter. What you feel is incidental, but it could be terrifying. It certainly could be terrifying. Fascinating. Okay, so we got a clear-ish number. We've got 1,000. You get to 1,000, and anything above 1,000 is awakening. So infinity is not awakening. Infinity is awakening, but you don't need to go to infinity to be awakened, which is better. So 0 to 4 is like normal people. 5 to 10 or whatever is like advanced meditators, and then 1,000 is when you're awakened. Very good. Very clear. Okay, more clear, not very clear, but more clear. Getting somewhere.
It's frightening how awake you are. You become so awake that you're beyond human levels of awakeness.
Okay.
You're so conscious, you're impossibly conscious. Your mind cannot fathom how conscious you've become. You've become so conscious, it's surreal. It is beyond what you would think is physically possible or scientifically possible. And your initial reaction is going to be something like, what the fuck is this? This is impossible. What is happening to me? It feels like some alien force has taken over your mind and your body.
It sounds like we're straying very far from pure awakening. Right, because then he's giving us interpretations as he's saying it. Like he's saying you necessarily have to interpret it in this way. You necessarily have to feel. I don't know. He's not saying it so strongly. He's not saying specifically necessarily, but this is how he's describing it. This seems to be how he's presenting it. You will feel terrified. You will say WTF, and you're going to be very dumbfounded and confused. But that just seems like more feelings that are not necessary for your awakening. That's how it sounds to me, at least.
Feels unreal, but at the same time, it's the most real thing there is, because this is the knob. You might also call it not just consciousness, but reality itself. The more this knob is cranked up, the more real things get. The more you see things for what they are. So
it's nice to understand and feel that the sense of realness is it's not necessarily tied to actual external physical reality. You could feel realness or not realness when engaging with actual physical external consensus reality, this stuff here. You can feel real or not real, and then you can engage with things that are not that, like virtual reality or dreams or something, and feel real or not real or more real even. And you can kind of play with the sense. You can actually try to tune it yourself. If you just kind of get a sense of what it feels like to feel real, just kind of try to figure out that sense. And then you can imagine it being stronger. And it can be stronger and it feels more real. Or you can imagine it being less and then it'll be less and you can feel less real. And it's a bit strange, but it's all just a feeling. So I don't think awakening has anything to do with that. This is more just feelings that you have. You can feel more awake. You can feel more reality. You can feel that you're in some sort of reality. The sense of reality can increase or decrease. Not really necessary here, from my perspective.
Right now, when you're at a 3 and you're sitting here and you're looking at a coffee table, to you it looks like a coffee table, and that's just what it is. When the knob gets cranked up to 1,000 or to 100,000, that coffee table, even though its colors and its shape doesn't change at all, what you understand it to be completely changes.
Man, I don't like the scale. It's being so wide because he's saying once you get to 1,000 or 100,000, that's such a wide range. I mean, I guess it could be a logarithmic type of scale, but it seems bizarre because 0 through 4 are very significant changes. For most people going to sleep and waking up, that seems like a very significant range of changes. So the difference between 1,000 and 100,000 are just like don't matter. It seems a bit strange. But okay, you can crank up to 1,000, see a coffee table, and you see it for what it is. What is it?
You no longer see it as just a coffee table, as a physical object in a physical room, part of a physical universe, made out of atoms and whatever else you believe about it.
Mm-hmm.
That object almost becomes like an alien object. And it's as though you're looking at that object for the first time. And when you look at that object, you truly see it for what it really is for the first time. And it feels like, the reason it's called awakening is it feels like you've awoken from the dream called life.
Okay.
You become so conscious, it's as though you're able to pierce through the fabric of physical material reality just with your mind. And you're able to comprehend its structure in its totality, what it is. Now, this is not a mental activity you're doing in the sense that you're sitting there thinking a bunch of thoughts, the way that a scientist might, if a scientist was thinking about some complex problem. It's not a function of complexity. It's a function of, consciousness. You become directly conscious of what things are, unmediated by any kind of thinking process. You
Hear that? Unmediated by any thinking process. So you're conscious about what it is, unmediated by any thinking process. However, he still thinks that we're going to add on top of that the interpretation of what it is that you've become conscious of without any thinking process. Right? So you're conscious of it without thinking, and then you think about it and you say, "WTF? This is crazy. This is impossible. I'm so impossibly awake." That to me, I guess there is a distinction there. I think there is a distinction there. There's enough of a distinction for him to apparently think it's necessary or important distinction. But to my ears, that doesn't seem like a very important distinction. I would think that you want to experience it with no thoughts and not be distracted by any interpretation that you have after you experience it with no thoughts and after it's experienced without mediated by consciousness or any conscious activity or whatever. But okay, so we're getting a little bit closer to what he's trying to describe here. You do experience it without any conscious deliberation, without any thoughts. However, you may interpret it immediately.
You just intuitively grasp objects in a highly multidimensional way. And you instantly understand what they are, what they really absolutely are.
I like when people say intuitive. It's just a word that I like to hear. I'm a big fan of the word. I don't know why I like it, but I like it a lot. what is this intuitive grasping? What does it mean to intuitively grasp something? And is intuition the opposite of intellectually grasping in his mind? Is that how he thinks of it? That's kind of how I think of it. But then, is all intuitive graspings or all intuitive graspings the same type of intuitive grasping, or are there distinctions within intuitive graspings or not? I don't know. And is there something that is not grasped? Is there some level that is beyond any intellectual or intuitive grasping and beyond grasping at all? Do we get somewhere there? Maybe I'm going too far, but I'd love to hear more about intuition from Leo and what he thinks are the distinctions between different types of intuition, if there are distinctions between different types of intuition. And we can get more into this intuitive grasping to understand what that means, right? Because there's so many different intuitions. I can listen to music and I understand it intuitively. I can look at a painting and I can understand it intuitively, right? But then you can also ride a bike and that's intuitive, right? You can do your spiritual awakening and that's intuitive. But then, like, how often do you pick your nose? I don't know, once a month? It's intuitive, bro. I don't really think about it. I don't have like a intellectual guide for how many times I pick my nose. How much do you blow when you blow your nose? It's intuitive, bro. You just do it. I don't know. How many times do you chew your food before you swallow it? It's intuitive. I don't know. It's intuitive. You just kind of feel it, man. You just kind of do it. It's intuitive, right? But it's kind of silly to just throw them all into the same category. If we're just saying intuitive and we want to be more precise and we want to be more clear when we understand what we're saying with these words, and if we're trying to communicate, it may be helpful to parse out what it means to be intuitive and if there's any differences between those things and if they're all the same or not. That's what I think, at least.
This is more than just experience. This is a heightening, a sharpening of what experience is, because your experience usually is at a level 3 consciousness. And here it goes up to 1,000 or 100,000. So this awakening is a pure...
Instinct and intuition aren't the same thing. Oh, that's so good too. Because I feel like instinct is a part of intuition. It's a type of intuition. But instinct is a type of intuition that doesn't develop. Right? You don't develop instinct. You have it, and that's it. But your intuition can develop. You can learn to shape and refine your intuition. Right? So like a person who's a music student, they can learn how to develop their ear better. And that's an intuition. It's not an intellectual pursuit, but it is something that can develop and change. And the same with the spiritual stuff, obviously. You can develop your spiritual attunement, maybe not for awakening, but all spirituality, there are lots of different aspects of it. You can grow and learn things in spirituality. It's intuitive, though. You can develop it. So is this awakening? Is this a type of intuition that you can develop and change and grow and refine? Or is it one that must be static? Is it some sort of instinctual thing that we're all endowed with that doesn't change and doesn't grow, doesn't refine? That'd be an interesting thing to parse out.
Lucidity.
Lucidity is another way.
That's a good word for it. Lucidity.
Awakening, lucidity.
We're just cranking up how lucid you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's an impossible level of consciousness. It's a level of consciousness that can't be imagined.
Okay.
When you're at a level 3. Because that level 3 is what limits your imagination. I could also describe it that it feels as though the air got sucked out of the room. Everything becomes just crystal clear and perfectly lucid.
Clear and lucid.
It's like you're sitting in a vacuum, looking at the room. The room becomes crystalline, luminous, hollow, empty, a pure luminous void.
But that's not, I'm curious if he's saying it becomes that, and he's being a little bit metaphorical, maybe not metaphorical. It depends on how he's using the words here. But I don't think I don't get the sense that he means that you see luminosity in the way that you see things normally. You don't see crystalline structures or anything. And maybe the air being sucked out of the room is referring to some sort of Like imagine that we have a fog or something when we're viewing the world with our own interpretations and our own consciousness and the way that we um, think about stuff and interpret things, and all this is a fog that covers the world, and all of that gets sucked out of the room. So imagining that type of analogy here, where the air gets sucked out of the room, and now everything is very clear, super clear, crystal clear, and lucid.
Now, the word void here is a little bit misleading, because when I say the word void, you might tend to think like the room disappears, the colors disappear, but they don't. All the colors are there. They're sharper than ever. They're brighter than ever. You recognize the self-luminous nature of consciousness and all objects. What you consider matter gets recontextualized as your own consciousness, and its luminosity becomes just blatantly apparent, undeniable. This absolute luminosity. You realize that consciousness is self-knowing and self-illuminating. Physical objects that you look at start to feel and take on the flavor of a hologram or a mirage, an illusion.
Okay, I like that. So he's being a little bit more clear. Well, I mean, as clear as you can be here. Taking on the flavor, things take on the flavor of a mirage, of a hologram. There's an extra sense of it being a hologram, or is it maybe the removed sense of it being real, even though that sense is increased? It's very strange to parse out all the different senses that we may have, and what is the difference between a sense increasing, the sense of reality increasing, or maybe the sense of reality being removed. And what does it feel like for a sense to be removed? Is there a difference between seeing darkness and not seeing at all? Right? Is there a difference between when you close your eyes and you see darkness, and the difference between what your elbow can currently see? Like, what does your elbow currently see? What is the visual content of your elbow versus the visual content of your eye? It's very different. Even if they're both, even if your eye is only seeing darkness, it's very different. So how do we parse all that stuff out? Is the lack of visual content from your elbow a feeling, a sense? Would you consider that to be something like that? So if we, by analogy here, remove the sense of reality from something, does that give us the sense that it's an illusion? Does that give us the sense that it's a hologram? Or is that just one way of interpreting it after the fact? After we start to think about it too much and we throw our concepts back on top of it, you start to sense that when reality is removed, when that additive is removed, we think of it as if something is a hologram. We think of it as something that is an illusory. So pretty difficult to parse out. Lots of different feelings that may be here or may not be here. That's how I'm following it. Now, don't get me wrong. When I say a hologram or a mirage, I don't mean that the objects become transparent. It's like a hologram in Star Wars. They maintain all the same solidity and color and opacity that they had before. Everything remains.
Your hand will not go through a coffee table. It will hit the coffee table just like it did before. So in that sense, it's not a hologram. But what I mean is that you realize that the physicality that you attribute to that coffee table is actually always was just a projection of your mind. And that really that coffee table is not a solid object the way that you usually thought of it. It is like a mirage. It is a mirage held within consciousness. It's a solid feeling mirage, but what you also realize is that solidity itself is also just another feature or mirage within consciousness. So even though your hand cannot go through a coffee table in this state, that doesn't undermine the fact that it's a mirage.
it seems like he's referring to how I was thinking about it, where you have this sense of reality. You have the sense that this is all, physical reality and it's all external. And it's here. And these are separate objective objects. And he's removing all that. You remove all that, and you get the sense that it is a hologram, or the sense that it's illusory. Doesn't change how you interact with it directly, because you still see it as an object, and you can still interact with it normally. But the sense of it being an external, separate, real object goes away. So it seems illusory.
Everything feels more vivid, and there's a hyper presence. Like you're ridiculously present. You're so present, it's scary. You never knew this level of presence was possible. And then what you notice, this pure luminosity that I was talking about, really what it does, it gives way to divinity. What you realize is divinity or spirit. The reason they call it spirituality. What is spirit? Spirit is what, at a level 3, we ordinarily call matter.
Spirituality, spirit or divinity. Okay, we're going to areas that are uncharted for me. I don't know what these words mean, so I'm going to have a more difficulty understanding exactly what he means, and more difficulty trying to translate exactly what he's talking about at the moment for myself to understand. So we're going to be just jumping into his language. Divinity in spirit is what you experience here, apparently. Interesting.
Or physical stuff. Physical objects. So everything that you're seeing right now in this video, if you're watching this is all spirit.
Okay, everything is spirit, everything is divinity. Wonderland, you've decided to stop watching Leo because he's lost in his awakenings? Well, different strokes for different folks, right? Different times. Some people will resonate more with different parts of what Leo has to teach. We can start with eating healthily, picking up girls, making them squirt. And some people want to transition to awakening. And then you can go back and forth as you wish. Leo's a kind of interesting guy. Why does all this explanation contain a root of solipsism? Oh, we don't project the laws of physics into the manifest. We simply become aware of existence and transcend the manifest. Yes, he seems to always kind of add a little bit of his own interpretation, right? He seems to, there's something that he's getting here, and I like what he's getting, but then he does throw in an extra interpretation that doesn't seem to be incredibly necessary for it. But we could follow along with this, and we're understanding, I think, a little bit, and trying to catch what he means by divinity in this moment, and what he means by spirit. So, at level 3, which is what presumably we all are at level 3 right now, or if we're super focused, maybe we're at level 4. Maybe if you've taken some DMT, you're at level 10 or something. I don't know. We're at a level 3 consciousness, and what we experience as matter is actually spirit. And you'll experience that if you get to level 1,000 or whatever. Okay?
The entire room that you're in, look around you.
Yes.
Look at your body, look at your hands.
Right here.
All of this is spirit.
Okay.
In fact, there's nothing but spirit. So what happens is that physicality and matter gets recontextualized as spirit or divinity.
What does that mean, though?
Why is it divinity? Why is it spirit? This will puzzle many people who have not experienced this. And I don't know if I can help to really explain it, because spirit and divinity are the best terms for it.
Okay.
Literally, it is spirit, it is divinity.
Literally.
So as it turns out, what divinity is not some metaphor. And it's not some stuff that some religious people made up because they were fundamentalists and dogmatic ideologues. Divinity is what happens when the knob of consciousness gets cranked up to 1,000 or 100,000. The more it gets cranked up, the more you recognize that everything that's happening here is divine. What does that really mean? I'm struggling for words to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what you realize is that experience, the raw qualia of experience, is absolute truth. It actually never was an experience. It just simply always was absolute truth. And when you realize the absoluteness of raw experience, it gets recontextualized as something that used to be temporal, from something that used to be temporal into something that is now eternal. Literally, what you become conscious of is that this qualia, the phenomenal experience that you're having right now, this present moment of this room, of that coffee table, of your hands, or whatever else you're looking at, it's happening in eternity. It's not happening through time. It's eternal.
Okay. I'm getting a little bit closer to where I can maybe understand a little bit. So again, back into the understanding that everything is kind of incidental in these higher states, or however you want to call it, these awakened states, as he's referring to it here. Things become a little bit incidental, and you have all these different senses and feelings, and one of them would be time. So you get the sense of time, and you can feel time passing. And if you get to a point where that function stops, where you just don't interpret time, you don't count time. And I don't mean like you don't deliberately, consciously count time, in the sort of background process that we have in our mind, counting time and having that sense of time, that can just stop and go away. And at that point, it doesn't feel like a long time. It doesn't really feel like a short time. And it doesn't really matter if you were to externally evaluate it, how long or short it was. It feels like forever is kind of a weird way of putting it. Eternity is a strange way of putting it, because it's not like it doesn't feel like a long time. It feels outside of time. Like you're not evaluating the timeness of it. So it's like instantaneous, but it's also like forever. It's eternal in a sense. It's not appropriate to evaluate the time passing, because that's not the function that's happening. When you start to get into, well, you can induce these sort of states where you're not evaluating the time. The feeling is that it's not, there's no time, but there's all time, and so on and so forth, because you're not evaluating the length of time. So it feels simultaneously incredibly short, instantaneous, and forever, long period of time. It's eternal. So that's how I'm interpreting what he's saying here, and that's a pretty simple thing to experience.
It exists eternally in the mind of God. And so what happens is that all of these colors and sounds and feelings that you usually experience and attribute to biological processes in a human creature organism, all of that gets wiped away, and you realize that actually all of this is the light of God. It's God shining through itself to itself.
Okay.
It's the mind of God self-illuminated.
Okay.
And color and sound and all sensation, the entire phenomenal manifold of your five senses, gets recontextualized, and you realize it for what it really is, which is pure magic.
Okay. I feel like he's just interesting. Okay, five senses. We have way more than five senses. You can investigate how many senses you have. Just take a look at your normal senses, and even look at the senses that the five categories of senses, and then look closer and then divide each sense as if it were a category and parse out the differences between those. That can be a fun exercise, and you can experience each of those senses individually without evoking the entire category of sense. So you can look at like the sense of sight, you see things, right? And you have the sense of depth, and then you have like your periphery, and you have movement, and blah, blah, blah. These are all parts of sight. And you can experience any one of those individually without evoking all the other parts of it. And that's an interesting thing. And maybe you can get into that and such a way that you expand your idea of what your senses are. So you don't have only 5 of them. And then you can go beyond the 5 senses that we generally think about. Anyway, I'm not sure why I'm getting into that. Hey, what's up? Yes, I was streaming on a Saturday. I was a little bored this morning. And I didn't have anything to do, so I figured I'd just stream. But okay, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. He's using a lot of like language such as God's light and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't really hit for me personally because I don't think in those terms of religious terms, and I don't quite like the tendency for people to use religious terms as kind of just an intensifier. And it sounds like he's doing, I can't quite tell, but it sounds like he's just using these terms to be extreme. He's just saying God for it to be extreme. And, it's the divine light of God's mind or whatever he said. And it sounds extreme or profound or something, but it doesn't really get me personally. Grandiose is the word. That's a very good way. It sounds grandiose, but it doesn't translate to me. I want to know what he means, not hear random grandiose things. Now, he may just mean it in that way, and that's just the best way for him to describe it. But for me, it doesn't really translate. Leo's valid.
It's acausal.
It's acausal.
There's no scientific cause behind it. There's no cause and effect.
Yep. So again, it's the same thing with the time thing, where time goes away because you're not evaluating time. The same sort of thing where science goes away because you're not evaluating the world in the scientific way, or you're not even evaluating the world in a logical, rational type of way. All the things that are associated with science kind of don't happen if you're in certain states of mind. All the evaluations of time, all the evaluations of cause and effect, what causes what, that can just go away. And it just seems like an acausal, eternal, blah, 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 all these kind of things. And it's because you're not evaluating it and you're not evaluating the world in those senses and in those ways. And when that just disappears, you don't have a way of describing causality. So it's acausal. If you were to interpret it after the fact and think about it, it seems acausal because you didn't evaluate the causality. And if you were to interpret the time after the fact, it seems like it's simultaneously instantaneous and eternal and forever because you didn't evaluate the time. So you just throw the label eternal on top of it. It's just that you're not evaluating these things because it's all incidental. Remember, when you awaken, all the things that are incidental stop happening. Not that they necessarily stop happening. They're just not necessary. You begin to be aware with the thing that is essential and not aware of, you don't really care about all the stuff that's incidental. All the incidental things can be there or not. It doesn't really matter. That's how I'm describing it, at least.
There's no chain of causation that led up to it. There's no physical laws. There's no evolution. Mm-hmm. There's no history. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's no mathematics. There's no computer simulation. It's pure amechanical magic. It's pure manifestation. Mind
magic
manifesting itself instantaneously. The mind of God. And then if your knob gets cranked up a little bit deeper, a little bit higher, and your awareness goes from looking out at the room more inwards towards the center of who you are.
Okay, very good.
The observer of this room. What you realize then is you have the I am God awakening.
Okay, I am God awakening. All right. So we moved away. Very good. He was talking earlier, and I kind of criticized because it seemed like he was specifically saying that you needed to be experiencing the external reality for something like this to happen. But very good here. We also have a turning inwards, and you can remove having to experience the external reality. In which case, I would probably suggest and maybe inquire with Leo and ask if he would, what his opinion would be if somebody is sleepy right? If you're sleepy, you're experiencing something external, right? These are feelings. These are external feelings. And if you turn away from the sleepiness and just look at whatever it is that's looking, or turn awareness on itself, or whatever fancy things that people like to say, and then you have this sort of, could you still have this I am God awakening that he's calling here, while you're sleepy, or while you're sleeping, while you're having a dream, or while you're not experiencing anything, while you're unconscious, and so on and so forth. I'd wonder what he would have to say about that.
You realize that you are God.
The mind of God.
So first you realize that the room is God. And then when you turn that in towards yourself, then you kind of ask yourself, well, what am I in relation to the room? You realize, oh, yes, the room is God, but the room is me, and I am therefore God. And there's a very distinct couple of insights that you get here. One is, first of all, you realize for the first time in your life that God is real. You realize what God is instantly. Like within less than a millisecond, you have a complete, well, I wouldn't say complete, but you finally have a recognition that God exists.
Remember, it's eternal, but still, there's milliseconds apparently. You instantly, within milliseconds, find out what God is. It's kind of weird to me that he would say that he said that you discover that God is real. Did he say that? He said you accept that God is real, or you understand that God is real, and then you understand what God is. Well, if you didn't know what God was beforehand, what you determined was real is not what you thought God was beforehand. So you don't figure out that God is real. You found out that something else this new thing is real, and you've just labeled it God. The label, it's kind of doesn't really matter. You can label it whatever you want to label it. It doesn't really matter what you want to label it. You can call it I am God, but if you're confused into thinking that God is what you thought God was beforehand, well, you're very deeply confused. You probably don't want to use that label. Maybe use a different label, because you can use any other label. Right? It doesn't make any sense to say you accept or believe that God is real when you have a new definition of what God is. It's just the same label to refer to something different, I think. Maybe it means that we figure out what people have been referring to this whole time. Well, I can ask anybody in the world. I can ask billions of people in the world what they mean by God, and not very many of them are going to be referring to the same thing that Leo is referring to. So maybe he does mean that, but if he means that we figure out what most people were referring to, he's deeply mistaken, because most people don't mean that. Most people don't mean that the essence of reality or just the pure consciousness is God. That's not what most people think about when they say God. So that wouldn't line up at all. Anyway, that's just me personally. I don't like the fact that it seems that sometimes we get caught up in the labels a lot. Really, really, really caught up in the labels a lot. And that is exemplifying that happening. If you discover that God exists, and you also change the meaning of God at the same time, you just use a different label. You don't need to discover that God exists, because what you've labeled God is something different from what you thought it was beforehand.
Not as a belief or a speculation or a philosophical postulate,
Okay.
but God, right here, right now, right before you. You're face to face with God. You have an instant comprehension and intuition that God is real.
Comprehension.
And now you finally understand what the word God refers to. So for your entire life, people have been using the word God, and you sort of understood what it means intellectually, but you had no idea until this precise moment.
Oh no, he did mean that. He thinks that people mean that. He doesn't. we all know, everybody knows that when people say God, they don't mean what he's talking about. I know that, he knows that. I know that he knows that. But it sounds like he's saying that he thinks that everybody else means God in the same way that he's saying God, which is very strange. So I'm not entirely sure how to interpret exactly what's happening right now, what he's saying here. I don't know exactly how to interpret this. If you awaken and you discover what God is, and people have been saying the word God all the time, and you kind of understood vaguely, you had a kind of a metaphor, but now you finally get what God is what you label God now what the label was referring to beforehand with all the other people when they're saying it? I don't think that's the case. And it seems like Leo is suggesting that that is the case, which is very strange to me.
And some switch was flipped. And right as that switch was flipped, now finally you understand what the word God was pointing to.
Was pointing to.
That's a huge
Interesting.
epiphany. That's a life changer right there. So that's your first time ever discovering that God is real.
Interesting.
But just because that switch was flipped doesn't mean that you yet understand that you are God. That goes a little bit deeper. That requires a little bit more consciousness and actually a little bit more facing of yourself, because there's a wall of denial between God and you that prevents you from accepting yourself as God. So a lot of people can have a mystical experience of God as other, something out there beyond. But they'll never connect the dot between themselves and what that other is, which means that they're not fully awake. But if we crank the consciousness up some more, and we also lower your defenses and denials, that wall of denial, then you realize and you turn inwards, you take that awakened consciousness and you turn inwards, you realize, oh, of course I'm God.
Drink tea. Why don't you drink tea today? You must drink tea every day. Drink some tea with me. It's a lovely day to have some tea. You woke up too late. Oh, unfortunate. Sad.
Just a part of God. See, again, people are so in denial about the fact that they are God that they might even then say, oh, yeah, Leo,
within
I'm a part of God. Sure, maybe. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you are the entire God. The God. Not a subset of God, not a part of God, not a toenail of God. The entire fucking God. And it's only when you fully embrace that do you really understand what God is, what you are, and only then would I say you're truly awake. Until you reach this point, you're not fully awake.
Okay. You are not a toenail of God.
And at this point, it feels very much like the universe has awoken to itself. For the first time in your experience, you, as the universe, realize you are the entire universe. And you always have been. And that you were just dreaming that you were human.
Okay.
And when that happens, your reaction is probably something along the lines of, if you're like me, now I understand. Now I really understand what's going on. See, you had no clue what the universe was up to.
Good. So I like this again. He clarified a little bit. You know, he's being a little loose, with the presentation. Sometimes he's saying, you will react in this way, you will interpret it in this way. But then in this case, he said, if you're anything like me, you will react in this way. So he's talking about his own reaction to whatever experience he's had. He's got this experience of being God and being the universe and so on and so forth. And then he reacts in this sort of, whoa, dude, crazy kind of way. But you don't have to. Not everybody has to do that. It's not necessary.
What the universe was, what life was, you had no clue what these things were until this moment. Only now do you understand, does it all make sense? All the pieces of life and existence finally fit together. And now you finally understand everything that's been going on. You finally see the game that was being played here, the cosmic game that God was playing with itself, dreaming itself into a human existence.
Okay.
Another thing that will accompany this is a universal sense of self, self with a capital S. Now, you tell yourself something along the lines of, I am the universe. You've become universal. You've went from a human in the universe to the universe dreaming itself as a human. You become cosmic. I am cosmic. I am the whole cosmos. And you feel like the whole cosmos. Your body especially gets recontextualized as cosmic stuff, not a physical object, but really cosmic, metaphysical. Your body goes from being physical to metaphysical. It's beyond physical. And yet
What is metaphysical stuff?
You are God.
Love to get more into that. Hey, what's up, Lunar? Thanks for following. I'd love to get more into what stuff is, because I think of stuff as being physical stuff. Stuff is stuff. We got stuff here. If we talked about metaphysical stuff, that's a whole different... What is that? What is metaphysical stuff? And what does it mean for you to change and to become a metaphysical thing? I don't know. Perfect line for the fall. Yes.
Colors don't change. The shape of your body doesn't change.
Nothing changes.
You just realize that your body always was metaphysical, and that physicality was just some bullshit you were imagining to fool yourself into thinking you're human.
That sense of physicalness goes away, and you don't evaluate it that way anymore. However, you could still have the sense of color and form and stuff. You still see stuff and feel stuff. It just doesn't seem like stuff. Very interesting.
Also, this may or may not happen to you, but ideally it would. Your sense of scale should disappear. So the idea that you're a small human inside of some larger universe, this should disappear. You should take on the scale of the entire universe.
That's another thing that you can very easily induce. You can get the sense of scale, like how big are you, how big is your room, how big are objects or whatever, and you can just change it. I don't really know how to describe it more different than that, but there's a sense that you have to represent scale, and you can manipulate that yourself consciously, actually, or you can accidentally do it if you meditate or something. You can just experience feeling like you're bigger, or experience feeling like you're smaller, or experience feeling like everything is the same scale or same size. Fifth jhana, maybe. I'm not talking about concentration or jhanas or anything. Nothing so exotic. Just a very basic experience of your senses, so you can actually be walking around and experiencing things and touching things, and everything just has the exact same scale. It's very strange. Or everything can just be wonky in their scales. So, yeah. Infinite space, fifth jhana. Yeah, I guess that could be, something similar to that. But if you're doing some concentration, you're probably not interacting with a lot of stuff in the world. You may feel infinite space, and it's just you in infinite space, but you're not going to be like you're not going to be looking at your hand and feeling like your hand is the size of the universe, or feeling your room and feeling like your room is the size of your head or something like that. At least I don't think. Maybe. You awaken to this holistic, metaphysical, collective being. Interesting. Yeah, because you can just do that. You can just kind of play with the sense of scale. I mean, it may take a bit of work and meditation and paying attention to it, but you can kind of look at things and get a sense of how big or small it is, and then just change it. I don't know how to describe it any better than that, but it's just something that you can do. And if you meditate a bit, you probably experience these sort of things where you feel like your room is smaller than normal, or you feel like you are bigger than normal in your room. I'm not thinking about jhanas and stuff necessarily, because if you get to higher states of concentration, it doesn't seem like there's a room. It doesn't seem like there's like a physical body. So what is the thing that seems like it's infinite isn't really what we naturally experience. So not exactly thinking about that. But yeah, okay. So as you awaken, this is one of those things that go away. That sense of scale, again, it's incidental, so it's not necessary for you to evaluate something like very big or something as very small. You could just stop evaluating the scale of things. So it seems like everything is equalized. And it seems like anything that you attend to, anything that you think about, anything that you focus on will be the exact same scale as everything else. It's very strange. It's pretty strange. Yeah, it's a strange feeling. So if you look at a rock and think about that rock, it seems like one scale. And then you look at yourself and think about yourself, that seems like the same scale because you aren't actually scaling it. And if you think about the universe and see the universe, it seems like the exact same scale, and so on and so forth. Apparently that can accompany all of your awakenings here. So very cool. Ideally it should.
Or what you should realize, that scale is relative. There's no such thing as scale. That means that when you look at your hands, you should realize that the scale of your hands is exactly the same size as the entire Milky Way galaxy.
And again, he's not saying that you're like confused, like you're not going to be confused into thinking that, like, if you get the sense that this rock is bigger than normal, you're not going to be like confused into like thinking you can't grab it. You can still grab it. Everything is normal. Everything is the same. It's just like there's a sense of scale that stops happening. So everything is equalized. Not that you're going to be walking into things because you think they're farther away, or you think that they're closer. You're going to be like grabbing stuff weirdly. That's not going to happen. Everything's going to be normal. Everything's going to be the same. It's just that this sense of things being at different scale goes away. So that's gone. It happens.
There's no difference between the Milky Way galaxy's scale, the scale of your hands, and the scale of one of your hairs on one of your fingers. Like, each hair on my hand is an entire galaxy onto itself. That's how conscious you become.
Okay.
And if you become even more conscious beyond that, you can actually zoom into every hair on your hand, and you can realize that it's infinite. That means it goes on forever.
Zoom in.
You can keep zooming into that hair forever. And in there, you will find more and more complexity and form, just like if you were zooming out of the Earth. You would keep zooming out and you would see galaxies and star systems and nebula and supernovas and whatever else.
Okay.
And you could keep zooming in, out and out and out. Well, you can keep zooming in forever too. And it's when you realize you can zoom out forever, you can zoom in forever, that no matter how zoomed in or out you are, you're always in the middle of everything that is, everything that you are, and therefore you are literally infinite and cosmic. And that there's no scale to anything.
A deep body
scale
scan.
loses all sense of proportion at this point.
Yes, the scale loses the sense of proportion. It's like doing a body scan, you think? That it's sort of going further into precision and deeper and zooming into something that you can always find more things going on. It's always very fun to try to experience your body, but like go further into it, feel your bones, feel your blood, go farther into it, feel the atoms or feel whatever is at the higher resolution, more precise level. And you'll keep feeling stuff, keep going. You'll keep feeling something. Very weird. Well, you'll feel it. So he's saying again, the sense of scale. Remember this, the sense of scale goes away. Doesn't mean that the actual physical scale changes, right? You could still pick up a ruler and measure things. And you can have a sense of, you can understand that this thing is bigger than that other thing. But the feeling of it just, it's not there.
It's infinite in all directions.
Scale is a feeling.
Another distinct epiphany and realization that comes with awakening is this profound existential sense of I amness. I am. I exist absolutely. I am existence itself. I am.
Okay.
For the first time in your life, you realize the significance of I am. And when you say I am, you're not saying I am a human. You're saying I am as existence itself. You are all of existence. This I amness is absolute. It has no opposite. And you realize that you can't not exist.
Okay.
Another thing that usually accompanies this is, of course, you transcend death. This can be framed in two ways. One way you can frame it is you could say, I've died. I've literally died, and yet I'm still conscious. You could frame it like that. Or you could frame it as death is imaginary and death is impossible because I am, I've always been, and I'll always be because I'm existence itself. So
I like how he gives both sides of that, two different sides of that. You are dead, but you're still here, or you can't die. You change who you are. Mm-hmm.
Both are just two sides of the same coin.
I like it.
And you can experience them in both ways. You can experience that as though you're dying. That's kind of if you're coming at it from the ego's perspective, then it feels like the ego is dying or it has already died.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be kind of shocking from the ego's point of view. Or if you are able to let go of the ego, then you can kind of just realize that the ego was just some imaginary construct, and it's not even appropriate to call it death because that's just literally just like a thought in your mind. You just let that go, and then you realize that you're the cosmic God mind, and then as the cosmic God mind, there's death is just another thought. It's just a figment of God's imagination. There's no such thing as death. There never was.
All just thoughts.
Just a dream.
Mm-hmm.
You have this surreal sense that your entire life was a dream. And this is the most astounding thing ever because it feels like you've broken reality. It feels like you've broken your mind. You've gone so deep into your own mind that you've realized that the mind wasn't contained inside of a brain, but rather that the brain was just a construct of mind. And when you've realized that, you've broken through the physical barriers that you thought were there your whole life. It's as shocking as walking through a wall. So imagine if you just tried to walk through a wall right now and it worked. Imagine how astounded you would be. Well, what I'm describing here is as astounding, if not more astounding than that.
Okay. I will not try walking through
When
a
it's
wall.
happening to you, it's so surreal, it seems so impossible that it strains your mind's credulity. Like, sometimes critics will hear me talk about this stuff and say, oh, Leo, well, this is just stuff you experience because you want to believe it. No, you don't understand how deep this goes. This is so deep. These realizations are so deep that you can't believe it. You can't even imagine it. You're in shock that it's happening to you. And yet it is happening to you. That's what's so shocking about it. And also, of course, what accompanies all this is that it's so fucking obvious. You say to yourself, of course, this is the most obvious thing ever. Of course, I'm the entire universe dreaming up my life. Of course, it's so obvious. It's just crystal clear. There's no doubt whatsoever. You're absolutely certain of it.
So you've got clarity, you've got shock, and it's also obvious. You've got this sort of dumbfounded, incredulous sort of reaction, but it's also obvious. Interesting, you have both extremes going on there. I wonder if both of those are just more feelings that are incidental and not necessary for your awakening. You don't need to feel this sort of confusion and dumbfounded and shocked. You also don't need to feel that it's obvious and natural and familiar. I mean, they'll seem to be two parts of a spectrum of feelings that don't really need to be there. That's how I would read it. That's how it sounds to me, at least. Okay, just throwing it out there. You may feel shocked. You may feel like it's obvious. You may feel familiar. You may feel alien. Those are all feelings.
You're so certain and it's so obvious that you might start to laugh because it's like a joke that anybody could ever doubt this. Another aspect of the realization is that it's so radical.
Big meme.
And you'll probably be muttering to yourself as it's happening to you, this is so goddamn radical. Like it's radical beyond any definition of radical. There can't be anything more radical than this in reality.
Okay.
Another thought that will probably cross your mind is that this is not at all what I thought it was going to be like. Here I spent years and years reading about awakening and thinking about awakening and dreaming about awakening and fantasizing about being awake. And now that it's actually happened to me, it's nothing like I imagined. Not even close. All that stuff that I thought awakening was, it's all bullshit. None of it was awakening. This is the real awakening. All of
I wonder if that, like, is anything like you thought it was? Or if you really think about something, it's always a little bit different from the experience. And I find it weird that we kind of hammer down on the differences of like spiritual experiences or awakening or enlightenment or all these other mystical stuff, you know, blah, blah, blah. Anything that's going on in the spiritual realm, a lot of people will hammer down that it's impossible to express via language, and any sort of theoretical understanding doesn't really match what's actually happening. But I feel like that is pretty much describes every single type of experience, right? Like if I'm thinking about music and I listen to the music, it's gonna be different. The way that I think about it, the way that I theorize about it is not going to touch me actually doing it. It's going to be very, very different. And so it goes for every type of experience. Right? The thought of drinking tea is not going to match the experience of drinking tea. And I try to say match, but I don't want to make it seem like one is above the other, because even that I think is a bit faulty here, to think that your imagination of something is less than the thing itself. They're just not the same. They're just completely different. And I think this follows for everything, not just for awakening. But maybe we can keep on and remember that. And hopefully if we keep doing that and have that in mind, we don't fall into this disappointment here. It seems like we've got Trungpa Rinpoche telling us that enlightenment is ego's final disappointment, right? You're completely disappointed because it's not exactly what you expected, or everything that you wanted is not there. It's all incidental. But if we keep in mind that when you think about something and what you actually get are not the same, they're not related, you don't even have to compare them, well, you don't need to be disappointed. You have ideas about enlightenment, they're fun. You have actual enlightenment, and that's probably, well, it may not be fun, but it's whatever that is too. And you don't need to compare the two. You don't need to be disappointed when there's a difference, because there's always going to be a difference. And that same follows for every experience, I think.
those were just stories and delusions.
Delusions.
And you realize for the first time in your life what it truly means to say that the map is not the territory. For the first time in your life, you realized the territory. And it's completely different than you thought it was. It's so far in the opposite direction of what you thought it was that you can't even imagine how you could have been so wrong. Imagine being so wrong about the nature of reality that you couldn't possibly be more wrong.
Oh.
That's how wrong you are. And you'll realize that. Mm-hmm. And it'll shock you how wrong you were. And all of your ideas about the Buddha and Jesus and all this stuff, it'll shock you how wrong you were. In a good way.
Okay.
Because it's even more amazing than you imagined. It's impossibly amazing. It's literally impossible. What's happening to you is impossible.
Literally.
And yet it's happening to you. Mm-hmm. And that's why you call it divine. It's way too good to be true. It's impossible that this is true. It can't be true. And yet it's absolutely true. Another thought that will probably cross your mind is there was never a self.
Mm-hmm.
Of course. Of course there was never a finite self.
It's so obvious.
Of course there was never a human self that was born. Of course. How could I have been so fucking stupid to ever buy this ridiculous notion of a human self inside of a human body? This is just idiotic. I was such an idiot for believing there was a self. Of course there's no self. How could there be a self?
Leo, enlightened Leo is very judgmental of non-enlightened Leo, which is funny. You don't. Hopefully, you don't need to go through this process of chastising your past self for engaging in the world in different ways than what you're now engaging in the world. Like, you don't need to go around calling yourself stupid or calling other people stupid for not seeing the obvious thing that you think is obvious in the current state of mind that you're in at that moment. It's just different. You engage in the world one way, and that's interesting, and you engage in the world in this other special way where you're awakened or enlightened or whatever, and that's interesting too. And you don't need to compare, you don't need to fight the other, you don't need one to be better than the other, you don't need one to override the other, you don't need your sort of no-self experiences and your enlightenment to override your past self-experiences and chastise yourself and call yourself dumb for having thought that you are self. It's just a different perspective. From my perspective.
This is what you'll be telling yourself. And then, after you're done with that, you'll look around the room in your awakened state, and you'll realize, oh, of course, so this is what is meant by nothing.
Aha. Nothing.
This is nothing. Now I'm conscious of nothing.
Nothing.
And again, you'll be shocked that nothing is not what you imagined it to be. Nothing is not a lack of color or sound or taste or sensation or objects. Nothing is the entire experience of life as you've always experienced it. It's nothing.
It's nothing. Nothing, another way of putting it possibly, would be the non-restriction of anything. So it doesn't need to have color, doesn't need to not have color, doesn't need to have form, doesn't need to not have form, doesn't need to be here, doesn't need to not be here, doesn't need to have scale, doesn't need to not have scale, doesn't need to have a time, doesn't need to not have a time. Everything is incidental, none of it matters. So it can be here or not. And it's like, oh, okay, I get the essence of the nothingness, even though you have all these other things that are here that are, in some perspectives, blocking away from the nothing, but apparently in this awakened perspective, none of that matters because it's all incidental. It doesn't matter. Would everythingness work too? Yeah, sure. The nothingness that he's referring to, again, it's allowing for anything. There's no restrictions. So everything can be here, nothing can be here. Doesn't really matter. It's just nothing. So you can call it nothingness, you can call it everythingness, whatever. It's all here. It's all the same.
Life has gotten recontextualized as absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. This is nothing. And then you'll realize that it's also everything. And then you'll realize that I am nothing and I am everything. And that, of course, they're the same thing. How could nothing and everything be different? What would separate them?
It's the same, man.
And you'll realize that there are no boundaries between anything. What is a boundary? Of course, there's no boundaries. And then you'll realize pure oneness, since all the boundaries dissolve between everything. You'll realize, of course, reality is just pure oneness.
Oneness, non-separation.
And then everything will make sense. Oneness explains everything.
And then everything will make sense.
And then maybe you'll realize that since I'm everything, I'm also the coffee table. Mm-hmm. I'm the cup. I'm the faucet. I'm the refrigerator. I'm the pencil. lying on the table. I'm the carpet. I'm the chair. I'm everything. And then you'll realize maybe, if you go a little deeper, and you turn that awareness even more deeply into your own psyche, you'll realize, oh my God, I'm also everyone, not just everything.
What's the difference?
I am my mother. I am my father.
Yeah.
I am everybody who I've ever interacted with. They are all my own mind. They were all me this entire time. All people are me. You might also realize or become conscious that the past is imaginary. You're imagining the past in the present.
Mm-hmm.
It might also feel like every moment in your life has been perfectly engineered to lead up to this very point of awakening, as though the very function of life and existence itself has been this moment of awakening.
That's a good feeling.
And of course, that's exactly what life is.
Everything leads up to this very moment, whatever this moment is, that special moment, whatever you like. It feels so good. Everything was perfectly in line to get you to that, whatever that one thing is. It feels so good. Again, I think it's unnecessary. I don't know how this is, it seems like more feelings on top of awakening, which aren't needed. And you don't need to have this feeling of everything being in perfect harmony to lead up to this perfect one moment. But man, it's a good feeling. I like it. I like it a lot.
Life is just a construct to allow God to awaken to itself. Mm-hmm. So that time that you were a kid back at elementary school and your parents bought you an ice cream cone and you licked that ice cream cone and then it fell to the ground and then you started crying. You remember that time and you realize, of course, that was just a stepping stone to my awakening right now.
Give us more examples, please. More specific, too.
And everything makes sense at that point.
Mm.
And then if you crank that knob a little bit further, you realize what you really are, what God really is infinity.
Okay.
What is really going on? What is reality really? How did it get here? Infinity. You are infinity. Pure infinite consciousness. At this point, you're overwhelmed with a sense of wholeness and completion. You feel totally complete. You feel totally at one with yourself. You're completely satisfied, a satisfaction beyond anything a human can imagine. You're totally complete forever. You are infinity. You're everything. You're everything that could possibly exist. You're total, you're complete, you're absolute. And this generates the deepest sense of peace that you can possibly imagine.
Oh, wow.
Just a profound sense of tranquility hits you.
Okay.
And you realize to yourself that this is the greatest thing ever. There can't be anything greater in the universe than this.
More good feelings. I love it. It feels so good.
And then you probably think to yourself, this will change the whole world. If only the whole world knew about this.
Don't do that.
This changes everything.
You don't want to fall into that one. Don't think that one, all right? Not everybody likes your hobbies, okay? Don't go around giving people Christmas presents that you would want. Find the Christmas present that they would want, okay? Don't be a weirdo. Not everybody likes what you like. You like what you like and enjoy what you enjoy. Not everybody in the world is going to change because they don't like what you like. What if they experience what you experience? It doesn't make them like what you like. The world's not going to change if everybody awakens or whatever. Not everybody wants to. That's not their thing. Let them do their thing. You do your thing.
You might also be tempted to go inwards and to kind of define what you really are. Like, but what am I? You still aren't clear about what you are. Because the ego mind is trying to put its finger on what it is, on what God is, and it can't. Everything the ego points its finger at isn't it. And so there's going to be this sort of confusion in your mind where it's like, yeah, I understand that I'm God. I understand that I'm nothing, but what is nothing? I want to define it. I want to grab it. I want to encapsulate it. I want to, well, how can I latch onto this nothing? And you realize, of course, that you can't. It's undefinable, literally. Infinity is undefinable,
undefinable,
ungraspable.
Ungraspable. Okay, we talked about that earlier, right? Because you can grasp things intellectually, and he said specifically this is sort of a intuitive grasping. But then even beyond that, if you go further, apparently, into your lucidity, it goes beyond even intuitive grasping. It's just not graspable. I like it. So Max asking, what if the thing is to support unnecessary suffering? Wait, what? What if your thing is to support unnecessary suffering? What if your thing is like to be evil, like from a conventional normal level to be a bad person, like to hurt people? I mean, if that's your thing, good luck, have fun, hopefully feel good about it, but that's a weird thing. In the range of human behavior, that's not one that's very common. It happens, it's not very common, but hopefully the person who's doing it feels fine. Hopefully. It's their thing, let them do their thing. Maybe you might arrest them or something, but it's their thing. Let them do their thing. Shouldn't we change that? I mean, you can change it if you like to change it. The thing is, we don't want to change other people's values, and you probably can't change other people's values. You can't really, I mean, you can awaken them and they'll just be awakened serial killers. I mean, there's not going to be any different. An awakened person doesn't necessarily have to be compassionate in the way that we think of what compassion is. Not necessarily. Awakened person doesn't have to be some sort of vegan who has never hurt anybody. Awakened people can do lots of horrible things. So that's not really a factor here. But if they're not interested in awakening, they don't need to be interested in awakening. And I don't think that we giving them awakening is going to change anything. But we can hope for the best and maybe hope that they feel good as they're doing whatever they're doing. And I don't know, maybe tell them not to talk to the cops because, talking to the cops is going to make it more difficult for them to keep doing what they're doing. I don't know. Then you want to encourage, obviously, the society to stop people from doing bad things and keep a cohesive society. But in terms of helping people who want to support unnecessary suffering, I don't know. I don't know if awakening is the way for them because not everybody wants to awaken. But I think some very good advice would be to not talk to the cops. Don't talk to the cops because you're going to get caught. And that'd be bad. It'd stop you from doing your thing. So don't do that.
Grasp itself. It's slippery. And that slipperiness is its very essence.
The slipperiness of the grasp is the essence. So you can try to grasp it intellectually, it's going to slip away. You can try to grasp it intuitively, it'll slip away. You can try to grasp it in all the different forms of intuition. You can try to grasp it musically. You can try to grasp it artistically. You can try to grasp it sexually. You can try to grasp it emotionally. You can try to grasp it however you like, but it's going to slip away. And apparently that's the essence of your identity. I think this is what we're getting at. Who you are, the definition of what nothingness is, or the definition of what God is, or you are. That stuff is just slippery. And however you grasp it, it's going to slip away. And that's it. Impermanence, the truth of impermanence. It just slips away.
And that's why you struggled so much to grasp it, because you can't grasp it. Even God can't grasp itself. It's a mystery unto itself. And then you fully realize the mystery of what you are, the mystery of infinity, the mystery of God. This is a profound existential mystery that leaves you in awe and wonder.
I like the usage of the word mystery here. To me, when I hear mystery, it just reads as something that is not describable in whatever current theoretical context you have. So if you have some way of understanding the world, let's say you understand the world scientifically, and then you interact with, some mystical stuff, it's going to be mysterious because you don't have a scientific way of understanding it. But then even when you're in the mystical things, you can have a mystical way of understanding the world, and there's going to be things that are outside of your boundary of the theoretical worldview that you've developed. So anything outside of that boundary is going to be a mystery. Anything that you can't describe with some sort of theoretical, with your current theoretical understanding or your current way of interacting in the world, anything that you can't describe theoretically will be mysterious. So I quite like that. Apparently, at some point, there's going to be something that is just essentially mysterious, essentially indescribable via any sort of theoretical explanation. It's going to be a deep essential mystery, and that's going to be at the heart of, well, presumably everything that you do. And if you look close enough, if you get increased precision to anything, you're going to find somewhere that there's going to be something that's indescribable from your current theoretical standpoint. So something's going to be mysterious, and that mystery is always going to be there.
And yet you're absolutely conscious of its mystery. That it is a mystery. It's an eternal mystery.
Eternal mystery.
Unto itself. That's just the nature of infinity. You also realize that it's utter perfection. It's absolutely perfect. It's heaven. You are in heaven at this point. And you realize infinite beauty.
I
it's
love
infinitely beautiful.
I'm a fan
you
again. I like the language he's
are
using.
infinitely beautiful.
Okay, I don't know what he means by infinitely beautiful. Maybe I don't like the language. All right, I like the heaven thing. Another way I would describe that, like if from your current way of evaluating the world and the current theoretical whatever way that you're interacting in the world, if it's only positive, well, it's heaven because it's perfect because there's no negative aspect of it. If you're not evaluating any negative aspects, there are no negative aspects. It's perfect. You're in heaven at that point. And then he says infinite beauty. Oh, tell me more about infinite beauty. I'm a fan of beauty. As you all know, I like art and I like beauty and I like the aesthetic world. So I want to hear more about this infinite beauty. What does that mean?
You realize for the first time in your life your own infinite beauty and your own perfection, which melts away all of your self-judgments and hatreds and criticisms and lack of love. For the first time in your life, you appreciate how beautiful you are and you fully accept yourself. And there you go.
That's it.
That's what I would call a pure awakening. Now,
okay, that was it wasn't so difficult. Pretty simple. I think he added quite a lot beyond the pure awakening, but I say quite a lot. I think he added a lot, but it wasn't terribly. It wasn't a whole lot. I think he did a fine job here of describing pure awakening. He did give a lot of things that seemed like feelings that are unnecessary. But whatever. It was just a little bit. It wasn't terribly too much. This was a pretty straightforward explanation. I like this so far. Very good. I think there's quite a bit more to the video though, so
be careful here, because what I've described is actually not a single awakening, but a series of many awakenings that I've had kind of combined together.
Okay.
So the chances that when you go on your next meditation retreat, or you do your next psychedelic or whatever, or you do some yoga, the chances that you're going to reach this level of depth and breadth of awakening that I just described here is extremely low, virtually zero.
You could also just pay attention to your next breath. That's good enough. And the chances of you experiencing all of this is extremely, it's absolutely guaranteed that you will definitely experience everything that he said. However, the next moment, you may not remember it. that may fall away. The memory of it may disappear. That may fade very quickly. In the same way, it's guaranteed. You go to sleep tonight, guaranteed you're going to have a dream. Mostly guaranteed, okay? Not everybody dreams every single night. If you're not sleeping well, that's a problem. Maybe pay attention to your sleep and improve that. No less, analogy here. Guaranteed that you're going to go to sleep. However, no, guaranteed you're going to go to sleep and guaranteed that you're going to dream. However, when you wake up, it is not guaranteed that you remember it. Same thing here. Guaranteed, next breath, you're going to experience everything that Leo has described in this video. Every single thing. But not guaranteed that you'll remember it in the next breath. So keep that in mind. The process is to remember, not to do it. You've already done it. It's already happening. The process is just to remember it.
In practice, what's going to happen is that you're going to get glimpses of these different facets that I've talked about. I've stitched together many facets here for you to present sort of the whole thing, but it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to grasp that whole thing all at once, especially in your early awakenings. It's just too much. It's shocking. Some of these facets just by themselves are so shocking and terrifying that it will take you months to integrate just one of these facets after you have it, assuming you even reach it, which could take you years just to reach it. And then you got to integrate it. And then you got to go back for more and find new facets and then integrate those and then stitch those together. So the whole thing, I mean, this we're talking years here, maybe decades of work to reach that what I've talked about. And also, even though I painted a relatively complete picture here of what I would call a pure awakening, I still haven't communicated the highest levels of awakening. This is still not the highest levels of awakening.
Remember the dial. The dial goes from, starts from 0 to 4. This is where we probably are at now, 3 or 4, 3 normal people. If you're meditating a lot, maybe 4 or 5. If you're on retreat, maybe 10 or whatever. And he's talking about level 1,000. And between 1,000 and 100,000, I think he was describing in this video. But you can go all the way into infinity, apparently. You can keep turning the dial all the way up. So there's much, much, much higher, further, more awakening to get to, apparently, if you wish.
I would call sort of intermediate levels.
Okay. Why is that
the
funny?
highest levels are so shocking, it's and so ineffable. They can't really be talked about. Basically, at the highest levels, I'll give you a little clue.
Give us a clue, man.
Even though it won't tell you much.
Yeah, whatever.
At the highest levels, what happens is at the highest levels, the colors and sounds and feeling, the visual field actually starts to break down and collapse.
Okay.
Because you're becoming so conscious that even the physical distinctions between walls, your body, and the coffee table, all of these physical distinctions start to break down. You realize that they were all imaginary. And the entire room sort of starts to collapse in on itself as the dream and mirage that it is. And then it turns into just an infinite singularity. Basically, imagine what existed sort of before the Big Bang. If you take all the matter in the universe and you condense it down into an infinitely small point that's smaller than the tip of a needle.
That's what happens when you get to the higher levels. Everything goes down to a singularity. So it's very nice that I don't know if he meant to do this, but it's interesting that he uses the word singularity because if we all know any sort of physics understanding, the singularity is meant to be a question mark. The singularity is the same thing as saying a mystery, right? It's not infinitely dense. It's not infinitely small or whatever. What actually happens, what the physicists are actually saying is that there's a point in time where our physics understanding falls apart. So we don't have a way of evaluating it anymore using our current understanding of physics. So all of our approximations don't work. And in order to express the approximation is no longer working, we say it's a singularity, which just means a question mark, which means we don't have a way of describing it. We say it's infinitely small or infinitely dense and infinitely energetic. It just means we don't know what it means. It's a big question mark. So it's all a mystery. He's just saying it's a mystery again. So if you get higher consciousness, it all just becomes a big mystery. And even what you're looking at and seeing, that becomes mysterious. It's a big singularity, infinite, small point, infinitely dense, infinitely full. It's just bursting with something that you can't evaluate. He's believing his interpretation is complete, the true one, but it's merely his personal interpretation, not a universal. Even though others may have shared this interpretation, this is just a personal one. Personal direct experience, which is good, right? He did explain that this is sort of intermediate. So if he set that in front, I would have been a little bit nicer with how he was saying that. So I wouldn't have nitpicked every single time. He seemed to give a lot more than just some sort of pure awakening. But okay, he's given an intermediate thing, so he's adding his own personal stuff, a lot of his own personal stuff into it. And now he's saying something about this more advanced, higher level awakenings, where it's just mysterious and there's no way to describe it. It's just a singularity. Okay, that seems a lot more universal, a lot more compatible with more things. I feel like I'm saying that weirdly. It seems a lot less like just some random personal experience that he may have had. But also, on top of that, he's not saying anything because he's just saying it's mysterious or it's a singularity or a big question mark. So, yeah, I don't know.
And yet it's all completely conscious of itself. That's what you become. You become this perfectly symmetrical. You become almost spherical. Or imagine becoming a geometric point. A point in geometry has it's a zero-dimensional object. Mm-hmm. It has no length or depth or breadth or size.
Yep.
And yet it exists. And in that point is contained absolutely everything it could possibly be. And that's what you become, and it's perfectly conscious of itself. And that is sort of the pinnacle of the Godhead. So that would be the highest awakening, at least that I've personally accessed.
Okay.
And at that...
See, again, it's so good. He's being a little bit more careful to say the highest awakening that I've accessed. Look at that. He's being a little bit more responsible here. Okay, he's not terribly overspeaking himself. He's not saying this is the highest awakening. That's what I've experienced. Okay.
Point, there is no form. There is no colors and sounds because you're too conscious even for colors and sounds to exist.
Okay.
So there you go. Now maybe you have an idea of what you're shooting for. Now again,
good idea, yeah.
These are just my experiences of my awakenings. Mm-hmm. To be honest, I have no idea what it's like for other people because I only have my own awakenings to work with. So I'm just speaking from my own experience here. Now, some people will say, well, but Leo, aren't these just pleasant experiences that you're having? These are just states that are generated by the brain, right? No. If you think that, you don't understand what I'm communicating. These are...
I love this so much. This is so good. He doesn't really bother trying to... Like, he's using this... He's making an attack on his own position, and he's preparing an answer for it. But he's not even bothering to go through the actual answer. He's just saying, no, if you think that you've misunderstood. Why even give the objection if he's not going to give a proper answer to the objection? He's preparing this. He's writing this video. It's so silly. Okay, you give this objection, No, it just means you misunderstood it, bro. Okay. In what way did we misunderstand it? Can you give us a little bit more? Can you expand on that? No, you just misunderstood
It's
it.
improper to even call these experiences, although they're not different from experiences. But what you call an experience, what you think of as an experience, is a deeply corrupted notion.
I love it. We've got this range of experiences. We're in a very, very narrow range because we think of our life as the only types of experiences. And maybe you have some exotic experiences, you increase the range. But at some point, you notice the spectrum itself, not the narrow range of experiences that you've experienced. And you have things that happen so far outside of your narrow range that it doesn't seem appropriate to call them experiences. And you may even have things that are outside of that spectrum. It's like, okay, these aren't experiences anymore. What you think is an experience is not an experience. What you think is an experience is not the limitation of experience. Experience is not limited.
Your ego mind is concocted. So to call what I'm talking about here as experience is absurd. What I'm talking about is absolute truth. And it's not rendered by any kind of brain. It's not beholden to any scientific process, any mechanical process. It's not beholden to atoms, to molecules, to matter, to neurons, to computer simulations, to calculations, to mathematics, none of that. It's beholden to nothing. It's bounded by nothing. It's limited by nothing. It's pure infinity. It's not happening to a human. It's not happening to a creature. It's not a biological event. It's not a physical process. It's not evolutionary. It didn't evolve. It didn't have a history. It wasn't caused by anything. If you think, oh, Leo, well, this was just caused by a chemical psychedelic. No, it wasn't caused by anything. Oh, Leo, but this was just caused by some meditation technique. No, it wasn't caused by anything.
This is amazing. Again, remember, he wrote these objections down, and he's reading a script here. I don't know if he's reading it directly, but he's got a script. He's had an idea of what this video is going to be, and he's got 3 objections so far. Aren't these just pleasant experiences? Wasn't this just caused by meditation, or wasn't this just caused by some chemicals in your brain? And his answer to all of these is just no, with no explanation. Just no. And his expounding on it is saying, no, it's not scientific. No, it's not causal. No, it's not the brain. No, it's not a feeling. No, it's not an experience. But he's just saying no. He's not actually explaining anything. So the people who have this objection aren't going to understand anymore. So why include the objection? It doesn't make any sense to me. Leo is so silly. I like it. Experience is the happening in the manifest, even though we may have a very transcendent perception of the manifest experience. We can expand awareness beyond even the manifest experience, manifest existence. So experience can also be transcended. Yep. So you have the whole range of what we experience, and you can transcend it. You have your narrow range of experience, and hopefully that expands a little bit, and you can get attuned to the whole range and the whole spectrum of all experiences. But then you can even transcend the manifest, transcend experience, go beyond all of it. It's all possible.
It's uncaused. From your current level of consciousness at a level 3, that's impossible.
It is impossible.
And you can't understand how that's possible until you crank that up to 1,000 or more.
It's impossible because, again, our conception of possible is within our narrow range of experience. We have a range of experiences. We think that the only thing that are possible is within our range of experiences. Once you have more exotic experiences, you can see that that range is a little bit foolish. You can go well beyond your narrow range of experiences and then go farther and further and further.
And remember, be careful, because none of your ideas of awakening are correct. And even everything I shared with you here, you might say, Leo, okay, so now I understand what awakening is, right? Wrong.
Get it.
You have no idea. Everything I told you is as wrong and far away from awakening as you could imagine.
So we have to remember again that there is a sharp, clear distinction between a theoretical explanation and the actual practice of doing something. Theory and practice are different. Theory and practice are different. And this applies to all things, everything, all things. You can have a theory of having sex, and you can have the actual practice of having sex. You have a music theory, and you can actually have music. And these are very different, sharply different things. And we can understand that listening to music theory, or sorry, reading music theory, reading an analysis of some sheet music isn't listening to music. It's a very different thing. The practice is different from the theory. Right? Reading about sexual thrusting or something is not having sex, right? Learning about the language that Leo's using to describe whatever it is that he's describing is not actually doing the thing that he's talking about. It's not having the practice of experiencing or transcending the experience or not having the experience, blah, blah, blah. It's not doing the thing. The practice is different from the theory. So you want to hammer that home and remember that, so that we don't go around thinking that we have a theoretical, when we have a sort of a theoretical understanding using Leo's theoretical language, that we don't want to have the confusion that this sort of theoretical understanding touches the actual practice. Very, very different things.
When you actually awaken, you will look back upon this and you will laugh at how wrong it was. So you might wonder, well, Leo, why did you tell me all this? Well, because that's the
Why'd you tell me?
That's the existential bind that we're in.
The existential bind. Yeah, I mean, for some people, having theory is helpful for the practice. Unfortunately, for some other people, it's not helpful for the practice. So, like, I can tell you how to talk to people. Like, I can tell you how to talk to strangers. I can tell you what the experience of trying to understand somebody's emotions in the middle of a conversation and how to read their emotions. I can give you a theoretical explanation for all these things, right? Like, if somebody's eyebrows raise, half a centimeter, what does that mean? If they smile but their eyebrows don't raise enough, but they raise too much, is it a genuine smile? Did they chuckle a little bit while they're doing this thing? Did their nose flare up a little bit? You can give all these like very precise theoretical explanations for how to interact with normal people in a normal sort of, social interaction. And for some people, when they have built up this theoretical understanding, for some people, when they go and actually talk to people, they will be liberated. They'll be so free. They'll be like, oh, I get it. I see the eyebrows moving and I understand what that means. Also, I see all these other things which were not clearly described in the theory, but now I have better eyes to understand what's happening. I'm very attuned to the situation. I can be in harmony with this social situation and I can interact with it well. For some people, that's good. And they actually learn how to practice and engage with social situations without the distraction. But other people, they get a little bit weird about it. They get a little bit neurotic about it. They start to try to measure every little thing. Like, did the eyebrows raise 1 centimeter or did it raise 2 centimeters? And does that mean that they're happy or does that mean that they're surprised? Should I be saying something now in this pause or should I be pausing along with them? Do I need to be maintaining eye contact as they laugh or should I look away? Some people can get too caught up and then the entire social situation falls apart and they never bridge the gap from the theory to the actual practice. So this can happen in either field, in all fields, in all ways of interacting in the world. You have some practice and you have some theory to describe the practice. Some people do better with their practice if they have some sort of theoretical foundation. Some people don't. You have to figure out who you are and how that works for you. But this video is helping people who can utilize a theoretical understanding to actually get into the practice. Although he's conceptually priming people to interpret awakening like he has, so it reinforces their reliance on his content. But conversely, if someone interprets it differently, they'll say he's wrong. So he's preemptively hedging the possibility by saying what he did. You think he's doing some nefarious things here. Okay, well, we got the conspiracies coming along here. I can read it in that way, definitely. Yeah. So if we give if we describe awakening in a particular way, now you're primed to view it in that way, and then now you rely on Leo's videos because you think he's the bearer of truth. But for some people, if they hear his explanation and it doesn't work out, they may run away. So he wants to hedge and make sure he's very clear. It's not necessarily this. So you can keep all the people. If you have the experience as he's described it or not, you're still stuck and you're still waiting for more Leo content. It would be it's a good strategy, definitely. It's certainly a good strategy. Whether or not it's nefarious. I don't think he's being nefarious, but it's definitely a good strategy, to put it that way. So when you lay it out that way, it's a very good strategy. So it's very possible that he's doing this deliberately, hedging his bet so that he gets it all ways. Very interesting.
If I don't tell you about awakening, we're damned. If I do tell you about awakening, we're also damned. We're damned if we do and damned if we don't. That's just the limitations of language and of mind and of your level of consciousness. You got to understand that this master control knob of consciousness, this is the bottleneck of everything, right? You can't be at a level 3 consciousness and then just assume that from that level you can see higher levels. You can't. You can't see above your level.
Mm-hmm.
So the only solution to that is not to stay at your level and then try to imagine higher levels. The solution is to actually grab that knob and fucking crank it to 1,000. That will solve your problem.
Crank it.
No amount of sciencing or logicking this thing or debating this thing or imagining this thing or fantasizing about it is going to change the fact that you're stuck at a fucking 3. When you're at a 3, no amount of thinking will get you above a 3. No amount of logic will get you above a 3. No amount of science will get you above a 3. You will be at a 3 forever until you crank that knob to something higher. That's just the nature of the beast.
That's it.
All right, that's it.
Okay.
Now you understand what awakening is. Yeah. All done. So I'm done here. Click that like button for me and come check out actualize.org. On the actualize.org website, you will find resources. You will find a book list. The book list is crucial to help you to wrap your mind around some of the things I say.
Anybody want to guess how much longer we have in the video? He's literally doing the end. He did the end. He wrapped it up. He said, we did it. And he's actually giving the spiel at the end to tell him to go to the website. And there's still 10 more minutes left. Okay, let's keep on watching.
I say some radical and crazy things on this channel that your mind will probably not want to believe. It'll be unbelievable, literally, to your mind. So how do you validate some of these things? Well, obviously by cranking that knob, but before you're actually going to even muster the courage to crank that knob, read some books. I got some incredible books on my book list written by masters and experts and teachers and researchers and PhDs and God knows who else that will help you to convince you that this is something that's not just ideas that I've made up. These aren't just Leo's delusions, right? I'm not the first person who's talked about this. I won't be the last. Thousands.
He's trying to convince us of something. Uh-oh.
Of people have experienced this stuff for themselves. You can too, right? So the books help with that. They help to lend a little bit of authority to this stuff if you need that. Now, you don't need that. The truth doesn't depend upon the authority of any book or human, but your dense mind might be benefited by that. So check out my book list. Check out my Life Purpose course. That's also available there. You can also find my blog where I post all sorts of interesting insights, videos, links, resources, articles. Don't miss those.
Okay.
I put quite a bit of time into my blog. Come to the forum, ask questions. Support me at patreon.com/actualized. I appreciate that. And check out my second channel called Actualized Clips. And then I'll end on one final point,
Okay, final
which is
points.
actually rather important. So listen close. Look, a lot of spiritual teachers and masters will try to convince you. There's this trend, this sort of neo-Advaita trend online, like they'll try to convince you that awakening is nothing special. Awakening is the most ordinary thing. It's not astounding. It's not special. It's not interesting. It's just the most ordinary thing. So don't go chasing after some extraordinary thing.
It's the natural state.
Right? You've heard this if you watched many of these sort of neo-Advaita teachers guiding you through self-inquiry and stuff like this.
We've all heard it.
This is deeply misleading. Deeply, deeply misleading. There can be shallow versions of awakening which are not very extraordinary. But there's just no way that you are going to comprehend the absolute nature of yourself, God, and the universe and not be totally blown away by it. The only way it won't blow you away is if you don't actually comprehend it fully. And I see a lot of people who get into these neo-Advaita teachings with self-inquiry and this sort of direct pointing methods and so forth. Then they start even denying things like God. They start denying things like love. They start denying things like infinity and whatever else. Dismissing these as just mystical experiences or some sort of ego concoctions or whatever, because awakening is just supposed to be this simple, ordinary emptiness or something. What they imagine the Buddha taught.
It's very interesting that, again, I mean, he may be, it's bizarre for him to, I mean, it's not that bizarre, it's on brand with Leo to call out other people for being misleading, but it's very strange, right? He was describing a second ago about how, giving this theoretical explanation for things may be helpful for some people, may not be helpful for other people. And in the same sense, the sort of neo-Advaita, everything is natural, there's nothing special, will be helpful for some people to actually get to whatever it is that you guys are talking about, and not helpful for other people to get to whatever it is that we're all talking about. So for some people, they're going to be distracted by the sort of nothing special, and they're going to be so distracted in that they're not going to actually experience any of the things that you want them to experience. But for other people, they're going to say, oh, nothing special. And then they actually unlock all the richness of experience that you can get to, and then even further into the non-richness, the poverty of no experience that you can not get to, I guess, however you want to use the language. Not so sure. Where's Rajiv? I think he left the, I don't think he's here anymore. Hey, Benevolent, what's up? Rajiv was a little upset one day. I think it was in one of the videos that we watched. I think it was in one of the videos. I think it's in the Kurt video, the Kurt and Atlas video. I wasn't interacting with chat to a sufficient level for Rajiv, so he publicly left the chat. Okay. Anyway,
that's actually not what the Buddha taught, but they imagine that's what the Buddha taught.
Wow. He knows what the Buddha taught, and it definitely wasn't apparently ordinary life. Natural experiences. Interesting. Okay.
This is weak sauce spirituality. It's a weak sauce version of awakening. This is not even close to a full awakening.
Wow.
It's a very deep trap. These people have no deep grasp of what reality actually is. What they've done is they've fooled themselves into emptying their mind through some kind of practices. And they've had some little glimpse of no self or something like that, or emptiness. And they think that they've comprehended the entire beast. And they haven't. They haven't. And I've been misled and gaslit by these people for a long time. In my own journey, it's taken me a lot of struggle to figure out just how fucking wrong these people are.
He's been gaslit.
So watch out. There's traps within traps within traps in this work. And when you think you've fully awoken, that might be the biggest trap of all.
True.
So watch out. Watch out with these shallow teachings.
Okay, I mean, we can agree
If
mostly here,
your teacher,
right? We want to agree mostly here, right? You do want to be aware that any description can be a trap. And you can get too caught up in any theoretical explanation for any spiritual whatever. Because the theory may block you from actually experiencing whatever it is that you're experiencing. So, yes. But that I'm not sure if that's especially a problem for any particular group. Leo thinks so. You know, Leo can have his thoughts, but it is an issue. It is an issue. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop infinity, carry absolute. Yes. Yeah, apparently. Being natural, everything being ordinary. Okay. Well, this is Leo's opinion. All right. This is his perspective. It's fine. If you think you have fully awakening, that's the biggest trap. Big truth drop from the most awakened person ever. More awakened than Buddha, more awakened than Jesus. I don't think we still haven't watched that video of him being the most awakened person and just like essentially this last 5 minutes of him railing on Neo-Advaita. He did that for a much longer time against much more spiritual communities in a longer video, which I don't think we watched all of it. We watched a little bit of it. He thinks he's very enlightened, or at least he did at that point in time. Anyway, silliness
is teaching you a version of awakening that is not completely ripping your whole reality apart and making you shit in your pants in awe and horror, leaving you completely dumbstruck and flabbergasted and writhing on the floor in ecstasy and wonder and mystery and horror, then it's not a full awakening. It's far shy of that.
When you have an awakening, there are apparently, according to Leo, some necessary external conditions that must be met. You must be dumbstruck. You must be feeling ecstasy, external feeling again. You must be feeling ecstasy. You must be pooping your pants in terror. Necessary facets for awakening. Even though awakening has nothing to do with external factors, necessary external factors for awakening. Leo's interesting perspective here today.
You're not comprehending how deep consciousness goes. Now, at the same time, even though I say that, of course, these teachers are right in a certain sense, in the sense that if what you do is you're always chasing some sort of peak experience or high, or you're chronically abusing psychedelics, and you're not willing to just sit down and do the work and to actually do the hard manual labor of like a 10-day boring ass grinding meditation retreat, that is a problem.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. He's given some good parts.
So there's sort of a middle ground here between, it's not an either or, like that you treat awakening as just some ordinary, simple nothingness or emptiness. Or you're chasing some sort of egoic, mystical experiences. It's like, no, there's something in the middle. These things that I'm describing, these facets, are definitely not egoic experiences.
Definitely not ego. Absolutely, definitely not. Nope.
And they're way beyond just ordinary realizations of no self. No self is a relatively minor and easy attainment in this work, on this path.
Okay.
God realization is way beyond that. And then, infinite, absolute infinite consciousness is even beyond that. So just keep that in mind. Don't rest on your laurels. When you have some awakening or some attainment, great. But then also, the reason I'm saying this is not to elevate myself, but just I'm saying this so that you don't get stuck at a low version of awakening.
Okay, he's trying to help us out.
Because I see a lot of people do that, and they fool themselves, and then they convince themselves that, okay, that's it, I'm done. I'm done. Enough of this chasing and seeking. It's just all ego. Like, they take this attitude and they think that they're being wise and spiritual when they do this. They aren't. They're fucking stupid. They aren't fully awake. They don't really understand what reality is. And you can easily demonstrate this to yourself once you do fully awaken. You can just look at people. You can ask them. You can just ask them one or two questions, and just how they answer you instantly tells you that they're not fully awake and that they haven't realized what God is or what love is or what infinity is or these other things. You can instantly recognize these things.
What are his test
And
questions?
then you can laugh at these stupid neo-Advaita people.
Jesus.
Who tell you that awakening is not astounding and extraordinary. It is the most extraordinary fucking thing that there could possibly exist. It's so extraordinary you can't even imagine how extraordinary it is. And yet at the same time, it can also be very ordinary. That's the paradox of it.
Wow. I mean, good Lord, he's real angry that people don't like what he likes, apparently. You know, these other spiritual folks don't like his toys, and he really wants other people to like his toys. Fascinating. Coming in late, have we already had the 2 critical examples? No, he has not talked about no horrible subjects in this video, actually. This has been a very wholesome video. There has been no terrible examples of any sort of anything. No, yet. I don't think it's going to happen. Okay, we're at the end of the video. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we had a mostly wholesome video, except for, yelling at other spiritual people for being wrong, apparently, and not meeting up to his standards and answering his questions in the right way. Beyond that, everything else has been pretty nice and wholesome, and, he's trying to help people understand a little bit. I think he's been doing fine.
And you have to distinguish what I'm telling you here from some sort of, mystical visions of Jesus and stuff. That's not what I've been describing here. I've been describing a very pure form of awakening. There's a lot of weird, new agey, mystical, schmystical, visionary stuff that you can experience with spiritual practices. Various kinds of cities and astral projections and DMT entities and angels and shit. I haven't talked about that stuff at all.
True.
I consider all that tangential. Now, I'm not denying those things can be conjured up by consciousness. Consciousness can conjure up anything. So I don't put anything beyond the ken of consciousness. But that is not like the purest, highest awakening.
Okay.
In fact, I wouldn't even call that awakening proper. Like, to see an angel, if you see one, it's not awakening.
Okay.
It might be a powerful mystical experience. It might be life-changing for you.
I think this is very good to sort of narrow out between, sort of parse out and distinguish between a mystical experience and an awakening. And of course, you can have mystical experiences while you're awakening, but it's not necessary. I think this is very good. He's hammering that home, keeping that in our minds. You don't need to have any exotic experiences. But then it's kind of strange because he seems to be saying that you do need to have an exotic experience, because he doesn't like the people saying that everything is ordinary. And he's saying that you must have a particular type of reaction. So you must be confused, elated, dumbfounded, pooping your pants, so on and so forth. But these are just extra things on top, which don't seem to be necessary from my perspective, for whatever that's worth. But again, interesting. Yeah, he's like, I mean, this is very good. He's contemplating the reality of consciousness and God. And it's a good contemplative look. I like it. Those eyes have seen some
It might even
things.
improve your life. It might get you to believe in God. Because if there's angels, you probably figure, well, God must be real too. It might do that, but that is not the same thing as realizing that you are God. And by the way, I have not, in this episode, described all of the facets of awakening. There are more facets that I have neglected here. For example, one of the facets that I neglected is the facet of self-design. I talk about it in my episode, The Many Facets of Awakening. Go check that out.
Okay.
But But even that episode doesn't cover all the facets because I'm still discovering more facets. I've had hundreds of awakenings. I'm still discovering more facets. So one of the facets is self-design. You become so conscious that you're God that you realize how you're actually designing the entire universe right now as you're sitting.
As you're sitting here, you're designing the entire universe, and you're designing all those plebs, all those spiritual noobs out there that we're dunking on at the moment, apparently. It's all being designed in our minds.
You see, that's what a full awakening really gets you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a deep comprehension of everything. It's like the ultimate big picture.
Okay. Wow.
It's not limited to some angel or some Buddha or just some Jesus. It is a cosmic scale self-understanding. So by no means is what I explained here the full picture. There's more stuff that I didn't have time to explain, that I forgot to explain. I literally have to keep lists of all the facets that I've discovered because there's so many, it's hard to keep them all in my memory.
Okay.
But if you want that list, at least a good portion of that list, go check out my episode, The Many Facets of Awakening, and stay tuned in the future for more, and I'll share more facets that I've discovered as well.
Okay. Wow. There you go. That was the end of the video. Finally, we got to the end. It was about 10 minutes ago when he said it was the end, but okay. I thought it was a good episode. Okay. Ignoring all of these sort of very negative parts where he's really aggressively angry towards people who have slightly differing opinions to him. Ignoring all that, I thought it was a fine episode. 10 minutes of venting. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think he went off script at the end there. Definitely that. Just started venting a bit. Okay, so we're going to read a little bit. Check it out. Kandinsky. We're going to read a little bit of Frank Yang. Frank Yang did a response here in the comments and also on Instagram, more fleshed out. So we're getting we've got all the facets of awakening as presented by Leo. We've got my interpretation of the facets of the awakening as presented by Leo. We've got a bit of chat giving us their interpretation of Leo's facets of awakening, and we're going to get a little bit of Frank Yang, and then potentially some Frank Yang viewers or readers in his Instagram. From Frank Yang. Cessation is zero consciousness, complete blackout, but I'm still on the fence of whether it's necessary for awakening. In my direct experience, it's the ultimate no experience that truly, truly rewires the brain permanently. It takes 5 to 10 years of meditation to get your first cessation. After awakening, you can get 10 cessations in 30 minutes of sitting. Enlightenment is not a state of consciousness. It is zero, if you want to put a number on it. If you want to turn your dial, you've been turning it all the way up to infinity, you've been turning it up to 1,000, you've been turning it up to whatever you want. Zero is enlightenment, not a state of consciousness, which makes it also infinite and inquantifiable. All levels of consciousness belongs to this dreaming mind, and they are byproducts of peeling away of the separation and all of your conditioning. Enlightenment is deeper than consciousness or even awareness. Okay. All right. That was he's adding nuance here. It didn't seem too aggressive. He didn't seem too mad. He didn't seem to be saying that Leo is necessarily wrong here. He said something about putting it down to zero, but zero is the same as infinity. And Leo talked about infinity. So maybe this was like a friendly, harmonizing. Frank Yang just adding his perspective along with Leo's. Nobody's being mad or bad or anything. You got automatic for saying you think Leo Guru is unclear because he has his normal examples. Except you said it. I see. There you go. He's just sharing his meditation model. Okay, yeah, he's just adding on, right? Frank isn't being too mean or weird here, okay? He's being okay. He's being nice. Now, we're going to keep continuing on to Frank's Instagram, where he expounded a bit more. So we'll see what he has to say. And as we read, we get this beautiful picture of Frank and a little bit of a bulge going on there. Oh, check it out. Check it out. People ask me People ask me to what Leo's new video, What Awakening Feels Like Again. People ask me to what? I don't know what he's trying to say in this first sentence, but we're going to try our best to interpret these things. Okay. People ask me to watch Leo's new video, What Awakening Feels Like Again, and here is my response again. Remove 2. People ask me what Leo's new video, What Awakening Feels Like. That didn't make any sense either, does it? Maybe people ask me about. I'll put it in about. People ask me about what Leo's new video. No. I'm sorry. Okay, we're going to get to it. We're going to be reading right now. We're reading it. No more stopping. People ask me about Leo's new video, What Awakening Feels Like Again, and here is my response again. If you wonder why I always respond to Leo, well, he's one of the only ones out there who is making content that provoke discussion. So here we are discussing. Everything Leo speaks about in this video in regards to awakening and God, I have personally encountered. The difference is I don't call it God. I don't call it love. I don't even call it consciousness. And I stopped giving them importance. Leo, puny Leo brain, is still giving them all importance, and he's still using this grandiose language. I, Frank, have not done that. Awakening is the most extraordinary thing one can imagine. Yes, it is absolutely mind-blowing. Absolutely. So infinite that there is no more mind at all. No more levels of consciousness. No more form. No more emptiness. Even awakenings and realization and even enlightenment itself are perceived to be stuff of the dreaming mind. It's all fleeting, nonsensical extras that aren't necessary. Of course, all of these experiences will make you poop in your pants, physically dying and so on, being so blown away that you're no longer human if you encounter all these things that you've encountered on the path. But eventually, they're all absorbed and they're all transcended. The more ordinary, the more divine. The better way to put it is that it transcends even the notion of ordinary versus extraordinary. So, on no self being a minor realization, Leo threw this in there near the end, that no self is something that is easy on the path. Let's get into that. Temporary experiences of no self on meditation or psychedelics is not the same as the realization of no self. Realization is deeper than a transcendental experience, and both are minor for sure. I think you meant transient here. Realization is deeper than some transient, fleeting, ethereal experience. Both are minor. Anything that's transient is minor. But the permanent dropping away of the self / the self is on another dimension altogether. The self and the self drops away, and there is nothing but God and infinity 24/7. There is also a huge difference between a self-perceiving God in the center versus permanently dropping away any center or any vantage point. And there's only the Godhead comprehending and creating itself ad infinitum. Ad infinite? Oh no, I'm reading that. I said ad infinitum, creating itself ad infinitum. That's what I thought it was saying. No, but I think it's saying creating itself and the infinite. It's only the Godhead creating itself and the infinite. Now, I can only speak from my personal experience, but before the self or the self permanently drops, even the most mind-blowing experiences still come from a self. If you had a realization or an experience, then you find yourself shifting back to the separate state. Then a temporary experience of this self, of this no self, is not a realization, let alone a permanent dropping away of the center, which is beyond any teachings of any contemporary. which is beyond the teachings of any contemporary Neo Advaita or mainstream New Age spiritual teachings. In fact, it's beyond all spirituality altogether. There's absolutely no reference points to this experience of permanently dropping away the self or the self. There is no words to describe it. It robs everything away from you, even consciousness itself and all of your previous realizations. There's no perceiver, there's no agency, and there is no center. At any time, at no time, it's all gone. Everything drops away. The enlightened self, sitting on its throne of nirvana, is the final layer of the dream. Once that goes, you're finally there. Also, Buddha didn't teach absolute self. He taught no self and no self, which is the middle way. The merging and the transcendence of being and non-being, the absolute infinity and the absolute nothingness. I think he taught self and no self? Or did he mean no self and no self? I'm not entirely sure. Okay, Buddha taught the middle way. But true self is no self. True self is no self. So let's not get bogged down on the terminologies here. Okay, the labels are labels. We don't need to get caught up in the labels. We don't want to get bogged down on that. True self, no self, all the same to me. But I see way too many people on the path getting stuck in identification with some sort of absolute self. Secession is zero consciousness, a complete blackout, and that is what makes the insight extremely valuable, because non-existence is in a totally different order than existence. No consciousness is in a totally different order than any levels of consciousness. Yet, they're also exactly the same, because two sides of the extremes will eventually cancel each other out and become a zero when they meet, as love and death and life and not love. I feel like I missed the opposite. But I'm still on the fence about whether it's necessary for awakening. Okay, do we need a cessation to awaken? I'm not sure yet. In my direct experience, it is the ultimate no experience that truly rewires the brain permanently. It takes about 5 or 10 years of meditation to get your first cessation. After your awakening, you can get into 10 cessations in one sitting. What I'm more interested in is the permanent shifts. It doesn't really matter how many awakenings one has had, but the moment-to-moment perception isn't permanently shifted. If that isn't shifted, then I'm not interested in it. So we want to shift from 720p to 1080p to 4K 360, 8K 360, maybe 8K 720. We got to get all this, or the self dissolving from solidity to liquid to air, and then if you're not doing all that, there's no realization. Enlightenment is not a state of consciousness. It is zero. If you want to put a number on this dial that you've been turning up and up, it needs to be zero, which makes it the same as infinity, which is the same as inquantifiable. Zero, infinity, inquantifiable. All levels of consciousness belong in the dream, and they are byproducts of peeling away of the separations and the separate conditions of the separate self. Enlightenment is deeper than consciousness, even deeper than awareness. It is not even a realization, it is not even an insight, it is definitely not an experience. As Krishnamurti said, the moment you are aware of awareness, you are not aware of awareness. It's deeper than some total unity. It's deeper than some oneness. As Adyashanti says, you eventually wake up out of oneness. You could say it is this prior to unity. It's the prior to unity in all states of consciousness. The thing that is prior to and what is manifesting the dial of awakening. It's where you have the space to even imagine a scale of being not awake and awake. It's before that. Shinzen Young describes the path as going from the surface level of consciousness down to the source. As many people in the path get diverted from going directly to the source, they sidetrack themselves with all this content, this manifestation, this sort of mid-path stuff. You know, angels, we've talked about that, ghosts and such, and cities. Source is appearance. Content is context. But this cannot be realized until one is abiding in source as source, right? Everything is the source. Yes, we get it. But you can't get that unless you experience the source as a source. It's like saying everything is meditation if you have never meditated before. It doesn't make any sense. You have to get to source as source. Go directly there and don't be distracted by mid-path. So, what happens after source is realized? Source can continue to explore the video game that you had existed in. There is no end to the infinitude of reality and its endless manifestations. But, as I've emphasized many times, there is an event horizon that you cross before and after enlightenment. Ramana Maharshi and many other sages on that level all point to the fact that enlightenment itself has no levels. You're either enlightened or you're not enlightened. And it's not a process happening anywhere. The question of whether or not it's a brain or a mind state becomes completely irrelevant because there is no inside and there is no outside. There are no lines of separation. Nowhere. Oh, was that the end? Oh, we did it. Wait. It just ends? It just ends. And that concludes the presentation from Frank Yang. There you go. There's no separation. I feel like Frank Yang didn't describe what awakening feels like, which was the video that we watched and what the video that he's responding to. Okay, Frank Yang, everybody. There you go. Frank Yang, everybody. I really like reading Frank Yang. He's really cool. Okay. Spiritual dick measuring contest. Yeah. Okay. Let's not be bogged down on terminology. He does that, definitely. Yeah. This type of rhetoric is so predictable. It's just counterproductive. Oh, man. Such said with a paradox. Yeah. It's this and that. It's both and neither, and not any of that at all. That's a good way of putting it. Okay, Frank Yang. I just always like reading Frank Yang. He's very entertaining and he has a good way of presenting himself. Though I'm not sure exactly, he didn't really seem to care to describe exactly what awakening felt like. He said some things so we can kind of understand no center, and I think it would be nice if he would have explained that a bit more if he was going to be explaining what it feels like to be awakened. But then after that, he just kind of tried to attack some of the things that Leo said and maybe some of the mistakes in Leo's language, I guess. But, whatever. Interesting enough. Interesting enough. Even the concept of enlightenment is a part of the dream. Good quote. This might sound like a stupid question. Some random person here. Yeety McSkeety. This might sound like a stupid question, but how do I reach enlightenment? I've had loads of psychedelic experiences, and I felt like what I've called, something that is close to enlightenment, but I also say it's felt a bit artificial. What is the organic way of expanding the mind to the dissolution of the self? Check out my website, frankyang.wtf. There's enough information there to help you awaken. Although it might not work for everybody, but I can share my direct experience. When I highlight my own path and all the resources and all the book recommendations which I found the most helpful. Okay, it's not something that you can answer in a sentence or two, yet at the same time, it's something that is right under your nose, which cannot be simpler. Oh wow, very cool. Okay. Rajiv has a video where he discusses non-duality. Can you link it? Yeah, we can watch it. The most organic is consuming your own feces. Style. Don't do that, okay? Don't be weird, okay? Conor Murphy is on a different dimension. Let him do his thing. He's a weirdo. You don't need to do it. Okay, what do we say here? Thanks for the added precision and nuance. Beautiful. The smiley face and a heart. Did Connor really do that? Don't ask. Okay. Okay. And also, I don't think I commented on the video. Look at that eye. So let's comment on Leo's video. Just say something very nice and simple. This is a lot of fun. Smiley face. Thank you, Leo. And yeah, I gotta maybe organize some of the questions that I may have. Kurt asked me to think of some questions and send them over to him because he's gonna be talking to Leo soon, so I'll have to think of some questions in a bit for this. Okay, let's check out Rajiv's video. We haven't seen Rajiv in a while in our chat. Unfortunately, sad face. One tear emoji for us. F's in chat. This is a long video. Okay. Okay. Maybe we should watch. Should we watch the whole thing? Is it worth watching all of it, or is there not much I can add? Maybe not. Let's take a look. We'll just watch a bit. Is that guy talking to Leo Gura publicly or privately? Kurt Jaimungal will be talking to Leo publicly.
Stopping them.
In a beautiful interview, very public. Did you give a timestamp? Oh, have I seen this video before? Why did it skip to the middle? Okay, back to the front. Yeah, Kurt's going to be interviewing Leo publicly, and yeah. So, it'll be a public thing. Sorry, let's pause the music. Let's get into this. Okay.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
The influence of Atlas is too pervasive, guys. We can't. Why? This is our new style of enlightened interviews. Apparently, this is too.
I saw you were at one of Howard's talks we recently published.
Oh my goodness! See, Rajiv was not going to say anything. If Andrew, the guest here, is he the guest? Is Rajiv the host here? Talk with Andrew. He just says talk. I can't tell if who's the guest and who's the host. Man, I feel like I give the sense that would have just been an hour-long stare fest if Andrew didn't have the courage to say something. Okay, let's hear one question.
It's good to see you here, though.
Oh,
And nice to see you also.
he's got a nice smile. Huh?
Do you have any pressing questions on your mind, bubbling up at all, or?
Uh, all the questions have yearly washed out from my system.
I haven't watched any of the video with you and Howard, so I don't know.
He doesn't. I don't know how this is gonna go. Andrew doesn't know what's going on here. He's very confused. He's a little. He feels a little awkward here. Okay, I can't. I mean, we can't watch this video. There's nothing to comment on. There's nothing to add on to. Rajiv understands the essence of true non-duality, and there's nothing for me to grasp, and there's nothing for me to add, and there's no need for me to do this. Do I know who Andrew is? No, is Andrew a guy? Is this a real dude, or is this like a just like a person that is one of the friends? I typed in his name into Google. I can't. There are people who have this name, but they don't seem to be like spiritual people. So I don't. I think it's just a person. Maybe he can.
I don't know anything about you, so this
Okay.
is a fresh,
Maybe we'll watch a little bit. Maybe he can introduce himself. Let's learn a little bit.
a blank slate here.
Okay.
So
The
what?
Bola Rasa. The Bola Rasa. But
Nothing
I think
media.
Leibniz gave this concept of blank slate.
Mm-hmm. It's funny
I
because
study philosophy.
yeah, I have a degree in that.
Okay. Well, this is a person who's a non-dual speaker. Apparently, he works with. He's done an interview on Nothing Media. It's a cool channel. Probably
Pretending to be Andrew.
a more proper interview on that channel than Rajiv here. The special type of interview. I think I want to watch this video, but I don't want to watch it right now. So we can't watch it right now, but we will continue to watch that at another date. However, it's about my lunchtime at the moment, so we got to do some lunch stuff for me. Got to get some lunch stuff. The question is just a question, so to speak. Wow. Shun the quest. There's no more proper interview. It's just a dual. True. To consider one to be a proper interview and one to be not a proper dualities, man. Dualities. Watch it Monday. Yeah, we'll watch it on Monday. Okay, we'll do it Monday. Okay. Well, I gotta go, but before I go, I just want to, take a moment to appreciate some very nice painting. Look at this. Look at this. This is a Kandinsky work. It's so good. It's so. Look at that. All these things going on. Oh my goodness. But there's this center that remains. Well, it's a center, It's a center. Nice work. Another nice work. Much more simple. A couple years later, 1 year later. Look at the simplicity. You get all these things going up. You get all these things happening. Things come up as your conditioning arises and you purify, but then at some point, and then a final pick. Painting. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is either. I'm not sure what's up with the background here. Still nice and separated. But I like it. Okay, anyway. Telescope pointing at the sun, possibly. All right, that was just a little bit of. I like art, so I want to share a bit. I'll be back on Monday. That'll be a lot of fun for Monday. Maybe watching some sort of proper interview, possibly. Or maybe something else, I'm not sure. So we'll be doing that on Monday. Hopefully, until then, you guys are taking good care of yourselves. Make sure to eat well, sleep well, blah, 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 all that kind of good stuff. You know, take good care of yourself. You're a cool person. You probably deserve to be treated nicely. And, you know, feeling nice probably feels pretty nice. So, you know, do the things that actually make you feel nice. It's pretty important. Do that. I'll be off. I'm going to tomorrow I've got a baptism. I'm going to see my dearest. I have a dear new friend. Her name is Maria. She's a little baby. I'm going to see her get dunked in the water and begin her Christian faith. So that's going to be very cool. Get to see that. And after that, I'm going to go to an art museum. So I'm going to have some fun on Sunday tomorrow. I'm going to have a lot of fun. Anyway, I'll be doing that. And, you know, hopefully you guys will be doing some things too on the weekend. And I'll see you guys on Monday.